The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension. Reporters jotted down every word. Lawyers huddled in whispered conversations, and the judge, a towering figure in his mid-60s with graying hair and a stern demeanor, sat at the bench, eyeing the room with an expression that conveyed both authority and skepticism. Today was no ordinary trial. This was a showdown between one of the most powerful tech moguls of the century, Elon Musk, and a rival corporation that had accused him of intellectual property theft and corporate sabotage. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon sat at the defendant's table, his usual calm demeanor betraying a flicker of frustration. His legal team, a group of sharp, well-dressed professionals, sat beside him, reviewing notes and preparing for the long battle ahead. But it wasn't just the corporation that Musk had to worry about. It was the judge. Judge Thomas Williams, known for his no-nonsense approach to the law, had made it clear in pre-trial motions that he was skeptical of Musk's track record. Musk's unconventional behavior, his impulsive tweets, and his brash personality had earned him the reputation of being arrogant and reckless in the eyes of many. "Mr. Musk," Judge Williams began, his voice deep and commanding, "I hope you understand the seriousness of the charges against you. This court will not tolerate corporate espionage, no matter who you are or how many rockets you've launched into space." The words stung, but Musk didn't flinch. His legal team exchanged glances, bracing for what was to come. They all knew this wouldn't be easy. But Musk, being Musk, had a plan. A plan that no one in the room could have expected. With a slight smile, Musk stood up, his tall frame cutting through the tension in the air. His usual casual attire, a black t-shirt and jeans, contrasted sharply with the stiff, formal atmosphere of the courtroom. He looked directly at Judge Williams and said, "I understand, Your Honor, but I think it's important to note, sometimes the court doesn't see the bigger picture." The room went silent. Even the opposing lawyers paused. Musk's words weren't a challenge. They were a statement. A statement that hinted at something deeper, something more strategic than anyone could have anticipated. Judge Williams narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean by that, Mr. Musk?" Musk leaned forward slightly. "What I mean is, I'm not just defending my company here. I'm defending innovation itself. And sometimes, the rules of this court, well, they don't keep up with the pace of progress." The judge's eyebrows shot up in surprise. There it was, the arrogance. The typical Musk bravado. "You seem to believe you can bend the law to fit your needs, Mr. Musk," Judge Williams said, his tone a mix of incredulity and contempt. "Well, let me make one thing clear. No one is above the law, not even you." Musk nodded. "I agree, Your Honor. But the law should serve progress, not stifle it. And when it's the law that stands in the way of progress, it's not a matter of bending it. It's a matter of moving forward." The judge was about to retort, but Musk's lawyer, a seasoned attorney named Lisa Hart, stood up. "Your Honor," she interjected, "we're ready to present our defense. And you'll see, as the case unfolds, that Mr. Musk's actions were not only within the bounds of the law, but they were necessary for the survival of innovation in a highly competitive industry." Judge Williams looked at Musk, his expression still skeptical. He hadn't expected this, but he wasn't convinced. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath, before signaling for the trial to proceed. As the first witness was called to the stand, Musk sat back in his chair, his mind already moving faster than anyone in the room could keep up with. The game was just beginning, and Musk wasn't about to let anyone underestimate him, least of all Judge Williams. The room buzzed with anticipation as the legal battle began in full force. But Musk had one thing that no one could anticipate: a legal strategy so genius, so unconventional, that it could turn the entire courtroom on its head. And he was about to show the world just how far his brilliance could go, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, the courtroom announcer chimed in, almost as if to break the tension. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the trial unfolded, the entire world would soon learn that Elon Musk wasn't just fighting for his company's survival. He was fighting to prove that genius, in all its forms, could never be underestimated. And this, the world would come to see, was only the beginning. Elon Musk didn't grow up in the lap of luxury. In fact, his early years were marked by challenges that would have deterred most. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon was the son of a Canadian mother and a South African father. His parents were highly intelligent, his mother a dietitian and his father an electromechanical engineer. But their troubled marriage and subsequent divorce shaped Elon's childhood. Elon spent much of his youth buried in books, seeking refuge in the world of science fiction and technology. His passion for computers emerged early, and by the time he was 12, he had already taught himself computer programming. It was during these formative years that the idea of creating something world-changing began to take root. But life wasn't always easy for Elon. He was a target for bullies at school, who teased him for being nerdy and different. Yet, this constant torment only fueled his desire to prove himself. At 17, Elon moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, a decision that marked the first of many bold moves in his life. His father had hoped for him to attend a prestigious South African school, but Elon had other plans. After 2 years at Queen's, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics, 2 fields that would later influence his groundbreaking work in tech, energy, and space exploration. Elon's ambition was as big as his intellect. He was driven by a vision of the future that no one else seemed to understand. He didn't want to just be successful. He wanted to change the world. His journey would not be easy. It would be filled with failures, risks, and near bankruptcies. But his resilience and relentless pursuit of innovation would become the hallmark of his career. In the mid-1990s, Elon co-founded Zip2, a software company designed to provide city guide software for newspapers. After selling Zip2 for nearly $300 million in 1999, Elon moved on to co-found X.com, an online payment company. X.com would eventually become PayPal, the company that revolutionized online payments and sold to eBay for $1.5 billion. By the age of 30, Musk was already a multimillionaire, but this was just the beginning of his journey. His vision was bigger than just tech or money. He wasn't interested in the mundane. He dreamed of changing humanity's future, not just in the present, but for generations to come. This thinking led him to found SpaceX in 2002 with the goal of reducing space transportation costs and ultimately making space travel affordable and accessible to the masses. Not long after, he became involved with Tesla Motors, a company focused on accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. Musk's endeavors in both space and electric vehicles were nothing short of revolutionary, but they weren't without enormous risk. SpaceX faced failure after failure, with multiple rocket launches ending in disaster. At one point, Musk had invested all of his personal fortune into the company. Tesla wasn't any easier. Manufacturing electric cars at scale proved to be an uphill battle, with the company teetering on the brink of bankruptcy more than once. But Musk's relentless drive and ability to think outside the box, what some would call his genius, kept him going. In the face of mounting odds, he managed to turn both companies into industry leaders. Tesla's electric vehicles began to sell in record numbers, and SpaceX became the first private company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station, changing the way the world looked at space exploration. As his fame grew, so did his public persona. Musk became a media sensation, equally known for his cutting-edge innovations as for his controversial Twitter posts. His personal life, too, was widely discussed. His multiple marriages, his outspoken views on politics, and his habit of saying whatever was on his mind. Many loved him. Others questioned his methods. But Musk's genius was undeniable. He was a man who could look at a problem and instantly see a solution no one else could. This courtroom battle wasn't just another chapter in his career. It was a test of everything he had built. In many ways, it felt like a culmination of the intense scrutiny and challenges he had faced throughout his life. The legal charges against him, accusing him of corporate espionage and intellectual property theft, threatened to unravel the empire he had fought so hard to create. But Musk had never backed down from a challenge before. He had faced adversity at every turn and come out on top. And now, as the trial began in earnest, Musk was facing a new type of battle, one that, in some ways, felt more personal than any previous challenge. It wasn't just about Tesla or SpaceX. It was about the future of innovation itself. Would his vision for the world be enough to withstand the weight of the law? Or would the very system he had once relied on to bring his ideas to life be the force that brought him down? Musk sat quietly in the courtroom, his mind already calculating his next move. He knew this would be the fight of his life. But deep down, he had no doubt he could outthink his opponents. After all, he wasn't just a businessman. He was a visionary. And in this courtroom, he would prove that no one could ever truly underestimate him. The day had finally arrived. The courtroom was now buzzing with the weight of anticipation. The stakes were high, and everyone in the room knew it. Elon Musk, the billionaire CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, was no stranger to pressure. But today, the pressure felt different, more personal, more precarious. He was facing serious allegations: intellectual property theft, sabotage, and corporate espionage. If he lost this case, it would be a public relations nightmare that could send shockwaves through the companies he had worked so hard to build. It wasn't just his reputation on the line. It was the future of innovation itself. Musk sat motionless in the defendant's seat, his eyes fixed ahead, his mind a whirlwind of calculations, risks, and strategies. The opposing team had come to play. The plaintiff, a rival corporation in the energy sector, was notorious for taking down its competitors by any means necessary. Their lead attorney, Thomas Hargrave, was a pit bull in the courtroom, known for his ruthless tactics and an uncanny ability to sway juries. Hargrave stood up, his sharp suit matching his sharp demeanor. With an air of confidence, he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're not here to talk about space travel or electric cars. We're here to discuss the hard truth. Elon Musk has used his position of power to steal intellectual property from our client. He has sabotaged our efforts in the industry, seeking to put his competitors out of business by any means necessary." Hargrave's words cut through the room like a knife. He wasn't pulling any punches. Every eye was on Musk, who, despite his cool exterior, felt the weight of the accusations like a heavy stone. The jury shifted uncomfortably, some whispering among themselves. The courtroom atmosphere grew tense. Hargrave wasn't here to just win the case. He was here to make Musk's name synonymous with corporate corruption. It wasn't just a legal battle. It was a full-scale public relations assault. But Elon Musk wasn't one to back down, especially when his back was against the wall. He had weathered bigger storms before. He had faced failure and ridicule countless times, only to emerge stronger. And he had learned one very important lesson along the way. The key to surviving any storm was to remain calm, focused, and, above all, strategic. Judge Williams, who had been listening intently, now turned his attention to Musk's legal team. Lisa Hart, the lead attorney representing Musk, stood up with a calm but resolute air. "Your Honor, we understand the severity of the accusations against my client, but we would like to point out that these allegations are based on nothing but circumstantial evidence and assumptions. Mr. Musk is a man who has created industries that didn't exist before. His success is not the result of underhanded tactics but the product of hard work, ingenuity, and a relentless drive to push humanity forward." Her words were deliberate, aimed not just at the judge, but at the jury, at everyone who might still be swayed by Hargrave's fiery rhetoric. She continued, "In fact, Mr. Musk's companies have contributed billions to the economy and have provided thousands of jobs. SpaceX has reduced the cost of space travel, and Tesla has changed the automotive industry for good. These achievements are not the result of theft. They are the result of vision and perseverance." The courtroom fell silent. Musk knew Lisa was doing her job well, but he also knew that the task ahead was far more complicated. This wasn't just about defending his companies. It was about defending his very way of thinking, his philosophy of business, and his belief that innovation was a force for good. Hargrave had painted a picture of Musk as a corporate thief, but the world knew a different story. Judge Williams, still stoic, glanced over at the defense team. "This case will be a long one, I presume," he said, his voice unyielding. "And I expect nothing less than the truth to come to light. Mr. Musk, you've built a reputation, both as an entrepreneur and a public figure. Your reputation will be put to the test here." Musk's gaze remained steady, but internally, he was already formulating his plan. He knew the courtroom wasn't where he thrived. It was in the quiet moments of reflection, in the late-night brainstorming sessions with his team, where his true genius revealed itself. He'd been underestimated before, by competitors, by critics, by doubters, but he had always come out on top. And this time would be no different. The trial continued, with each side presenting evidence, calling witnesses, and questioning experts. The prosecution's case appeared solid. They had emails, documents, and expert testimony that seemed to point to a pattern of corporate espionage. They had even brought in a former Tesla employee who claimed to have witnessed Musk's direct involvement in the alleged theft. But Musk, who had dealt with countless setbacks in his career, remained unfazed. He knew this was just the beginning. The evidence they presented could be dissected, questioned, and, most importantly, exposed for what it really was, a carefully constructed narrative designed to destroy him. Musk's legal team was on edge, but they trusted their leader. They knew they were fighting against more than just a legal case. They were fighting against an entire system that didn't understand the way Musk operated. The mainstream world couldn't grasp that the future Musk envisioned wasn't always linear. It was disruptive. It was bold. And sometimes it wasn't pretty. As the first day of the trial drew to a close, Musk stood up from his seat and walked out of the courtroom with his team. The media cameras flashed, capturing every step he took. But Musk didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply walked, his mind already racing ahead to the next move. He had no doubt that this trial would be one of the toughest battles of his life. But it was just another challenge, and Elon Musk had faced and conquered much bigger ones. And if he had to, he would go to the ends of the earth to prove that no one, not even the most powerful corporations or the most skeptical judges, could ever truly understand his vision. The storm was brewing, but Elon Musk was ready for it. He wasn't just fighting for his company. He was fighting for the future. The second day of the trial felt even heavier than the first. The courtroom was charged with a palpable energy as the case against Elon Musk gained momentum. The opposition, led by Thomas Hargrave, had presented a barrage of evidence, documents, witness testimonies, and expert analysis, all aimed at painting Musk as a corporate criminal. It was a strategic move that put Musk on the defensive. But those who underestimated him were making a critical mistake. Musk knew that when facing overwhelming odds, you had to play the long game. And the courtroom was not where he had ever excelled. He was a visionary, not a lawyer. But his genius lay in the ability to think several steps ahead, to spot patterns, and to use every resource at his disposal, including the people who had been by his side for years. In the silence of his private chambers, just moments before the day's session resumed, Elon was lost in thought. His legal team had presented solid arguments, but Musk had a deeper strategy in mind, one that had nothing to do with the typical legal process. The key to this entire case wasn't just to defend his companies. It was to turn the tables in such a way that no one could deny the brilliance of his approach. He turned to Lisa Hart, his lead attorney. "Lisa, we need to do something unexpected," Musk said quietly, his tone sharp with resolve. "Something that will shake the foundations of this case." Lisa nodded, but she was uncertain. "What do you have in mind?" Hargrave is so focused on the facts, the documents, and the witness statements that he's ignoring the bigger picture. We need to make them see something that they haven't accounted for. Something that proves not just my innocence, but the very foundation of what this trial is about. Lisa looked at him, skeptical but intrigued. "And how do you propose we do that?" Musk didn't answer right away. Instead, he smiled, a flash of confidence flickering in his eyes. "It's time to bring the world into this courtroom." By the time the trial resumed, Musk had already set his plan in motion. He had his legal team file an unexpected motion to the judge, a motion that would allow him to present a piece of evidence that no one saw coming. A live video feed, direct from the control center of SpaceX. Judge Williams had looked puzzled when the motion was first made. He wasn't accustomed to requests that felt more like stunts than legal strategies. But Musk had made it clear that this wasn't a stunt. It was a chance to show the true nature of the work he did every day. The kind of innovation that the courtroom had yet to witness. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that you allow me to present something that I believe is crucial to this case. We're not just talking about business practices. We're talking about the future," Musk had said. What I'd like to show you today is how we operate at SpaceX, not just in the boardroom, but in the field. I believe this will provide context that will shift the narrative of this trial. The judge, while skeptical, reluctantly agreed, and the court was soon abuzz with the unexpected turn of events. Within minutes, the large courtroom screen flickered to life, and the image of a SpaceX rocket launch began to fill the room. The crowd fell into stunned silence as the camera zoomed in on the rocket, ready for liftoff. This wasn't just any footage, it was live. The rocket, poised on the launch pad in the midst of the launch countdown, was the centerpiece of Musk's defense. Musk stood, his posture straight, as his voice echoed in the hushed courtroom. "This, Your Honor, is what we do. Every single day, every single hour. Innovation at its highest level. We take risks, we fail, and then we try again. Better, stronger. This is how we've revolutionized space travel, how we've brought the impossible to life." He paused for a moment as the countdown continued. What the prosecution fails to understand is that the pursuit of progress is not always clean. It's not always straightforward. There are moments of trial and error, of learning from failure, of taking steps no one else dares to take. The room watched in awe as the countdown hit 0, and the rocket shot into the sky, leaving behind a plume of smoke. The room was filled with a collective gasp. People couldn't help but be amazed. This was not just a man defending his company. This was a man who had redefined what was possible. And in that moment, Musk's message was clear. This was bigger than just a lawsuit. It was about a vision for the future, a vision that transcended traditional boundaries. He turned back to the judge. "This is what's at stake. This is what's being threatened in this courtroom today. This trial isn't just about intellectual property. It's about whether we're going to stifle progress or allow it to flourish." The room was silent for a beat. Then, slowly, the murmurs began. Musk had done the unthinkable. He had turned the courtroom into a stage for his vision, and the world was watching. Judge Williams looked at the screen, then at Musk, clearly processing what had just transpired. He hadn't anticipated this kind of response. "Mr. Musk, this is highly irregular," he said, though there was a hint of awe in his voice. "I understand, Your Honor. But this is the reality of what we do. This is the work that the prosecution is trying to discredit. And this is the work that makes the future possible." The jury exchanged glances, and it was clear that Musk had just shifted the dynamics of the trial. What was once a legal battle now felt like a battle for something larger. A contest not of facts, but of ideals. Musk wasn't just defending himself, he was defending the future. And with that, the trial entered a new phase. The players had changed. The narrative had shifted. Musk's genius had turned the courtroom drama on its head, and now, it was up to the opposition to catch up. The room buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Elon Musk had done the unthinkable. He had used SpaceX's live rocket launch as a weapon in his defense, and the court was still processing the shock. The once clear narrative that painted him as a corporate villain was now blurred by the image of a rocket soaring into the sky, a symbol of human achievement and technological breakthrough. But while the courtroom was still reeling from the dramatic moment, Elon knew he had only taken the first step in shifting the tides of the trial. The real battle lay ahead. Hargrave, the prosecutor, was not one to be easily rattled, and Musk had no illusions about the fight still looming. The opposition would retaliate. They would go after his credibility, his methods, and his very soul if they had to. Musk sat down again, his expression a mask of calm, but his mind was already at work, planning the next phase. He wasn't worried about the legal fight per se. He was worried about how far the other side might go to discredit him personally. The allegations had already taken a toll, but this next phase, the emotional heart of the battle, was where the true danger lay. And then, as if reading his thoughts, Lisa Hart leaned over to him. "Elon, Hargrave's going to come at you hard now. He'll hit you where it hurts." Musk nodded. He knew. In fact, he expected it. But he had an idea, one that would not only expose the hollow nature of the accusations, but also reveal the core truth about why he did what he did. It was time to show the court something far more personal, something that even Hargrave couldn't counter with his legal acumen. The day's proceedings resumed with Hargrave taking his turn to speak, his expression hardening as he focused his attention squarely on Musk. The smooth, calculated attorney had been rattled by the rocket footage, but he had regrouped quickly. Now, he was about to use a different strategy, the personal attack. "Mr. Musk," Hargrave began, his voice carrying a chilling calmness, "you claim to be an innovator, a man of the future. But what are you truly? A businessman obsessed with creating a monopoly, driven by an ego so inflated that you'll do anything to maintain control, including resorting to the worst forms of corporate misconduct." The prosecutor's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Musk could feel the pressure building. He wasn't surprised. This was exactly what Hargrave had been gearing up for, turning the trial into a personal character assassination. Hargrave had no real evidence of wrongdoing, but he knew how to manipulate the jury's emotions. You've built a public persona as a visionary, but underneath that persona is a ruthless man who uses people and manipulates systems to get what he wants. You've never been interested in the greater good, have you, Mr. Musk? All you care about is winning at any cost. Tell us, how far will you go to protect your empire? Musk could feel the weight of Hargrave's words like a weight on his chest, but this time, he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his gaze steady. It was time to speak the truth, not the polished version that the media loved to parade, but the raw, unfiltered version that no one had seen before. "Hargrave, you're right about one thing," Musk said, his voice quiet but firm. "I am driven by something. I have been since I was a child. But it's not ego. It's not a desire to dominate anyone. What drives me, what has always driven me, is the belief that we, as a species, need to think bigger. We need to do more than just survive. We need to thrive. And the only way we do that is through innovation, through risk." The room fell silent as Musk's words sank in. The prosecutor's sharp tongue faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the emotional weight in Musk's voice. He wasn't prepared for Musk to break down the facade of the corporate villain the court had been led to believe he was. Musk continued, his eyes never leaving Hargrave. "I've built companies that challenge the status quo. That's what Tesla and SpaceX are. Challenges to a world that's stuck in the past. People said we couldn't make electric cars work. They said we couldn't send rockets to Mars. But we did it. And we did it because we didn't give up. Not because we wanted to crush our competitors. We did it because we believe in the future of humanity." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to hang in the air. "Every decision I've made has been for that purpose. And if that's what you're accusing me of, fighting for the future, then yes, I am guilty. But I'll take that guilt any day of the week, because I know what's at stake. I know what's possible. And I know that what we've accomplished is bigger than any one person. It's bigger than Tesla, SpaceX, or even me." For a long moment, the courtroom was still. Hargrave opened his mouth to respond but paused. There was no immediate comeback to Musk's impassioned declaration. The emotional intensity in the room was undeniable. Musk had not only deflected the attack, he had flipped it back, exposing the very heart of why he did what he did. Judge Williams, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Mr. Musk, I believe that's enough for now. You've made your position clear." But the damage had already been done. Musk's words had hit home, not just for the jury, but for everyone in the room. Hargrave had tried to tear him down by attacking his character, but Musk had shown his vulnerability, his true driving force. An unwavering commitment to innovation, to the betterment of humanity. It wasn't about winning. It was about creating a future that mattered. The next few days of the trial felt different. There was a subtle shift in the courtroom. Musk's emotional testimony had changed the atmosphere, making it harder for the opposition to paint him as the villain they had worked so hard to portray. The jury, too, seemed more contemplative, their faces no longer filled with suspicion, but with curiosity. Musk's vision for the future was undeniable. But even as the courtroom shifted, Musk knew this battle wasn't over. The prosecution would not relent, and the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. But for the first time since the trial had started, he felt a surge of hope. Not because he had won, but because the truth was finally out in the open. He had shown who he was, what he stood for. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful weapon of all. The days following Elon Musk's emotional testimony were a blur. The defense team worked tirelessly, organizing their arguments, dissecting the evidence, and carefully preparing for the inevitable rebuttals from the prosecution. But something had changed in the courtroom. The mood had shifted. Where there was once skepticism, there was now a measure of respect. Where there had been doubt, now there was curiosity, and even a degree of admiration. Musk, however, did not allow himself to dwell on the shift in the atmosphere. His focus remained singular: the future of his companies, the integrity of his work, and the vision he held for humanity. There was still so much at stake. He had done his part in showing the jury who he was, but now he had to rely on his legal team to tie it all together. The prosecution would not go down quietly. They would fight to the very end, and Musk knew it. The following week, Hargrave was back on the offensive. With a new wave of energy, he came at Musk harder than ever, attempting to chip away at the defense's foundation by highlighting gaps in their case. But no matter how hard he tried, Musk's team held steady. It was clear to everyone in the room that Hargrave's accusations were becoming increasingly baseless, built on conjecture rather than solid evidence. The emotional weight of Musk's testimony had already done the unthinkable. It had made the prosecution's attacks feel hollow. The final days of the trial came with an unexpected turn. Hargrave, who had been so aggressive earlier in the trial, now seemed almost desperate. The prosecution was grasping for any leverage they could find, and it was evident in their disjointed arguments. Musk could feel it. The momentum had shifted in his favor. It wasn't about the legal points anymore. It was about the story being told. On the last day of the trial, as the closing arguments were made, Lisa Hart rose to speak. Her voice was steady and calm, but there was a quiet strength in her words. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, looking each one of them in the eye. "This trial isn't just about Mr. Musk. It's not about his companies or his reputation. It's about something far greater. It's about the future of innovation, of progress, of the very technologies that will shape the world we live in. We've heard a lot in this courtroom. We've seen documents, we've heard testimonies, but none of that changes the fact that what Mr. Musk has done has benefited us all." She paused for a moment, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "You've seen his vision for the future. You've seen the passion with which he works, and you've heard him speak with honesty about the mistakes, the risks, and the failures that came before the successes. This is a man who has dedicated his life to challenging the status quo, to creating a world where technology works for the betterment of everyone. And while we may not always agree with his methods, we cannot deny the magnitude of what he's achieved. We cannot let a few unsubstantiated allegations undo what he's accomplished. And we cannot, in good conscience, punish someone for pursuing a dream that so many of us are still too afraid to imagine." As Lisa's words echoed through the courtroom, the jury sat in silence. There was nothing more to be said. The arguments had been made. The evidence had been presented. All that was left was for the jury to deliberate. The jury was deliberating for hours, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, their cameras flashing, their microphones ready. No one knew what the verdict would be, but the anticipation was palpable. Elon Musk sat alone in his private office, reflecting on everything that had led him to this point, the good, the bad, and the moments in between. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a small moment of introspection. The trial had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but it had also reaffirmed everything he believed in. The future of humanity depended on the pursuit of bold ideas, on the willingness to fail and try again, on the belief that the world could always be better than it was today. He had faced down the odds, fought back against a relentless opposition, and held firm to his truth. And, no matter the outcome, he knew that the fight had been worth it. The jury finally filed back into the courtroom, their faces unreadable. The judge called the room to order, and the courtroom fell silent once more. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. The jury foreman stood, his hands shaking slightly as he addressed the court. "We, the jury, have reached a verdict. On the charge of intellectual property theft, we find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty." A wave of relief washed over Musk, and for the briefest moment, he allowed himself to exhale. The battle was over. He had won, not just for himself, but for the vision of the future he believed in. But it wasn't just the verdict that resonated with him. It was the understanding that, despite the intensity of the trial, the world had seen him for who he truly was. They had seen the risks he took, the challenges he overcame, and the failures he had embraced along the way. And in that moment, he realized that this trial that had felt like an attack on his very soul, had become a defining moment in his career. It wasn't just about defending his companies or his reputation. It was about something far greater. The media erupted in a frenzy as the news of the verdict spread. Headlines ran across the world, many heralding Musk as a champion of innovation and perseverance. Some critics still held their reservations, but the tide had turned. For the first time, people understood the depth of his passion, his commitment to pushing boundaries, and his unwavering belief in the future. Musk didn't celebrate with grand gestures. Instead, he quietly returned to his work, back to his factories, his labs, his teams. The victory wasn't about public acclaim. It was about the next challenge, the next mission. There was so much left to do, so much to build, so much to change. As he stood in front of his team at SpaceX, they celebrated together, not as a company defending its leader, but as a group united by the same vision. A vision of a future that was still possible, if they dared to chase it. And with that, Elon Musk realized that no matter how many battles he fought, no matter how many doubts the world cast his way, the true measure of success would always be the impact he left behind. His work would continue to shape the world long after this trial faded into memory. The days following the trial were a whirlwind for Elon Musk. It wasn't just the media frenzy or the victorious verdict that consumed his time. It was the quiet realization that something monumental had shifted. The world now had a clearer picture of who he was, not just a businessman or a tech mogul, but a visionary driven by the belief that humanity's future depended on bold ideas and relentless innovation. Though the legal battle was behind him, the weight of the trial lingered. The press, eager to capitalize on his newfound hero status, pelted him with questions at every turn. Yet, Musk remained unfazed by the attention. He wasn't in it for the accolades or the headlines. He was in it for something much bigger. The fight for the future, his mission to get humanity to Mars, to combat climate change with sustainable energy, to revolutionize transportation and space travel, was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Elon sat in his office at SpaceX late one evening, reviewing plans for the next Mars mission. His thoughts weren't on the trial or the media blitz. His mind was fixated on what came next. How could they push the boundaries further? How could they make the impossible possible? He was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," Musk said, not looking up from the papers in front of him. It was Lisa Hart, his lead attorney, now his trusted advisor in business matters as well. She looked more at ease than she had during the trial, but there was a glint of something new in her eyes, something that spoke to a future not defined by past struggles. "Got a minute?" she asked, walking in and taking a seat across from him. "Of course. What's up?" Musk responded, finally lifting his gaze. "I've been thinking," Lisa began, her voice measured but tinged with excitement. "The trial may be over, but there's still a lingering question. A question that I think we need to address head-on. The world has seen the side of you that is a relentless innovator, but what about the human side of Elon Musk? The part of you that's about the people, the family, the sacrifices? You've always been private about it. But now, after all this, don't you think it's time to show them the real you?" Musk raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to talking about his personal life. But the truth was, his life had always been wrapped in the mission. His companies, his vision. Yet Lisa was right in one way. The trial had revealed the world's deep curiosity about him, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a person. Perhaps it was time to let people see a different side, a side that wasn't all about business. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. "I'm not sure the world is ready for that, Lisa. I've always kept my private life private for a reason. People need to see the work, not the man behind it." Lisa nodded, understanding his hesitation, but there was no stopping her enthusiasm. "But think about it. The public is hungry for more than just the company headlines. They want to understand the heart behind the genius. They want to see the sacrifices, the moments of doubt, the personal drive that fuels everything you've done. It's not about oversharing. It's about humanizing the story. The world respects you for what you've built, but what if they could respect you more for the person you are, the father, the friend, the man who doesn't give up? Musk was silent for a moment. His mind wandered to his children, to his close friends, to the few who had seen him in moments of vulnerability. His public persona had always been that of the forward-thinking, tough-as-nails CEO, the one who never backed down, who never showed weakness. Could there be a version of him that the world could understand better if they saw the man beneath the public figure? Finally, he looked at Lisa, a half-smile forming on his lips. You know, you might be onto something. Let's see where it goes. Over the next few weeks, Musk worked with Lisa and a select few members of his team to craft a more personal narrative. It wasn't about his business ventures or his innovations. It was about the human elements that had shaped him into the man he was today. Together, they put together a plan that would allow Musk to share more of his story, his childhood, the challenges he faced, the relationships that had defined his path. But even as he prepared to open up, Musk was careful. He knew the risk of exposing too much. The world could easily twist his words, scrutinize his every action. He had spent years keeping his personal life behind closed doors for a reason. But with the trial behind him and a new phase in his life unfolding, he understood that it might be time to take the next step. The reveal came a few months later, a long-form interview with one of the most respected media outlets in the world. It was a carefully controlled environment, but one that allowed Musk to speak honestly about his journey, his struggles, and his triumphs. He spoke about his early years in South Africa, the loneliness he had felt growing up, and his drive to prove himself in a world that didn't quite understand him. He talked about his relationships, his family, and the toll that his relentless pursuit of innovation had taken on those closest to him. He admitted the mistakes he had made, the personal failures, and the times when he doubted himself. But he also spoke about his unshakable belief in the future, his conviction that technology could change the world for the better. "I've made mistakes," Musk said in the interview, his voice softer than the usual brash confidence. "But I think the most important thing is to not give up, to always keep going, no matter how many setbacks you face. The world doesn't need more perfection. It needs people willing to take risks, to fail and try again. The future doesn't belong to the cautious. It belongs to the bold." The interview was a sensation. The public responded in ways that Musk hadn't expected. His vulnerability, his willingness to admit his flaws, resonated deeply with people. They saw him not just as a genius or a corporate mogul, but as a human being, someone who had struggled, suffered, and fought for his vision. It wasn't just about rockets or electric cars anymore. It was about something more profound, the shared human experience of ambition, failure, and the pursuit of something greater. As the weeks passed, Musk found himself reflecting on how far he had come. The trial was behind him, but it had shaped him in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. The fight for his companies, the battle in the courtroom, had been important, but it was the people around him, the ones who had supported him through the storm, that had truly made a difference. And it was those people who had helped him find his voice. His work continued. SpaceX was preparing for the next mission to Mars. Tesla was on the verge of launching new electric vehicle technologies. But now, more than ever, Musk understood the importance of human connection. It wasn't just about the future of technology. It was about the people who would one day live in that future. Elon Musk was not just a man of innovation. He was a man of vision, but also of heart. The world had seen the genius, the drive, the unyielding spirit. But now, they were seeing something deeper. A man who had built everything on the foundation of his own failures and triumphs. And as he looked ahead to the future, he knew that no matter what came next, he would face it with the same passion, the same drive, and now, the same humility. Elon Musk had always been someone who embraced the challenge. It was in his DNA, from the early days of his ventures at Zip2 and PayPal to his relentless push at Tesla and SpaceX. But there was something different about the challenges he now faced. The world had seen him at his most vulnerable, and the response was overwhelming. People were inspired, but they were also waiting for him to step up, to deliver on the promises he had made, to continue pushing boundaries. Musk knew that the trial was just a chapter in a much larger story. The victory had solidified his place in history, but it had also created a new set of expectations. The world now saw him as something more than a businessman. They saw him as a symbol of resilience, of someone who could withstand any adversity and come out on top. But with those expectations came pressure. He sat in his office, staring out over the SpaceX launch pad in the distance, the sun setting in the horizon. It was peaceful, but Musk couldn't shake the feeling that the clock was ticking faster than ever. There was so much to accomplish. Mars was still the ultimate goal, but there were new challenges on the horizon. Challenges that stretched far beyond space exploration. "Hey, Elon," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Jared, one of the senior engineers at SpaceX. "You've got a call with the UN tomorrow, right? They're pushing for some new initiatives in climate change. They want to talk to you about Tesla's role." Musk didn't turn away from the window but nodded. "Yeah, I remember. They've been eager to get us involved in some of the more ambitious global goals for sustainability. It's something we've been working toward for years, but I'm guessing they want to make sure we're on the same page." Jared hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "You've been quiet about a lot of things lately. I know the trial took a toll, but what's next, Elon? Where are we going from here?" Musk finally turned to look at him, a small smile playing on his lips. "We're going to keep going. We're going to push harder than ever before. The world needs us more than ever." Jared raised an eyebrow. "More than ever? I thought we were already on the cutting edge. Mars, electric cars, sustainable energy. What more could they want?" "It's not about what they want, Jared," Musk replied, his voice growing serious. "It's about what we need to do. We've built incredible things, but it's not enough. Not by a long shot." The call with the UN was set for the next morning. Musk was prepared. He knew the importance of the conversation. It was a chance to solidify Tesla's position as a leader in the global fight against climate change. For years, his company had been at the forefront of the electric vehicle revolution, but the world was changing rapidly, and the pressure to innovate faster was mounting. As he sat down at his desk and took the call, he could already feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. The line connected, and the UN representative, a woman named Karen Miles, appeared on the screen. "Mr. Musk," she began with a professional smile. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. We know you've been through a lot recently, and we appreciate your continued commitment to the cause." Musk didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I'm here to help. What exactly are you looking for?" Karen took a deep breath before continuing. "As you know, the world is in the middle of a climate crisis. We've seen unprecedented weather events, rising sea levels, and widespread environmental damage. The UN is pushing for bold, global action. We need companies like Tesla to step up and lead the charge. And we need solutions that go beyond just electric cars. We need infrastructure, we need energy solutions, and we need innovation at an even faster pace." Musk's mind raced. The conversation was going exactly where he expected. But the scope of the problem was bigger than he had anticipated. Tesla had already made enormous strides in sustainable energy, with solar products and the Powerwall, but Karen was right. What they were doing wasn't enough. "Not yet." "Karen," Musk said slowly, "you're asking for a lot. But we're in a position to do something much bigger than just providing electric cars or clean energy. What we need is to completely rethink how we live, how we power our world, how we transport ourselves. And we need to move fast." "I understand," Karen replied. "But what does that look like in real terms? What kind of innovation are we talking about?" Musk's eyes narrowed with determination. "We need to scale everything. We need to build more gigafactories, not just for cars, but for energy storage and solar production. We need to make renewable energy cheaper and more accessible to everyone. And we need to completely disrupt industries like transportation and shipping. But more importantly, we need to think beyond Earth. The future of humanity depends on becoming a multiplanetary species." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Karen didn't respond immediately, perhaps trying to process the enormity of what Musk had just laid out. "We're committed to the cause, Mr. Musk," she finally said. "But this is a global effort. We'll need collaboration, support, coordination, and we need results fast." Musk nodded, a spark of excitement lighting up his eyes. "Then let's do it. Let's stop talking about incremental change and start building the future we all know is possible. That night, Musk didn't sleep much. The weight of the conversation with Karen had only added to the burden he already felt. The responsibility to push for something bigger, to create lasting change on a global scale. He was used to the pressure, but now, it felt like the stakes had grown even higher. The next morning, he called a meeting with his leadership team at Tesla and SpaceX. As they gathered in the conference room, he could see the familiar faces of his trusted colleagues, people who had been with him since the early days, people who understood the importance of what they were about to discuss. "We've got a lot on our plate," Musk began, his voice steady but determined. "But it's time to take things to the next level. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. We need to push harder, move faster. The world is counting on us, and I believe we're in a unique position to lead." There was a moment of silence, but then Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, spoke up. "What exactly are you proposing, Elon?" "We need to build more energy solutions, more infrastructure, more systems. We need to scale faster than ever before. And we need to push the limits of innovation, not just in space or electric cars, but in every aspect of how we live. We've been making strides, but now we need to accelerate." Gwynne exchanged a glance with the rest of the team, and then she nodded. "We're with you. Let's do it." Musk's heart raced with excitement as he looked around the room. He could feel it, the beginning of something monumental, something that could change the world in ways no one had ever imagined. The challenges ahead were immense, but Musk had never shied away from a challenge. In fact, it was the challenges that fueled him. And now, with a new sense of purpose, he was ready to lead the charge into a new era. Elon Musk had always said that the future of humanity depended on becoming a multiplanetary species. That vision was no longer just a lofty idea or a distant dream. It was within reach, and the road to Mars was getting clearer every day. SpaceX had already made monumental strides, launching rockets that were reusable, lowering the cost of space travel, and proving that humanity could go beyond Earth. But now, the true challenge lay ahead, sending humans to Mars. Musk sat at the head of a table in SpaceX's mission control room. Around him were engineers, scientists, and strategists, all the brightest minds who had been working tirelessly on making the Mars mission a reality. They had already planned the journey, designed the spacecraft, and even developed systems that would allow astronauts to survive the long trip. But Musk knew that it was not just the technical challenges they needed to overcome. The journey to Mars was a symbol, a declaration that humanity was ready to step beyond its earthly bounds. "All right, team," Musk began, looking over the room of faces. "This mission is more than just about landing on Mars. It's about the future of mankind. We have to do this right. We need to think bigger, bolder, faster. We're not just launching rockets. We're launching a new era for humanity." There was a murmur of agreement as the engineers nodded, but there was also a palpable sense of pressure. Musk could feel it too, the responsibility of shaping history with every decision they made. He'd made his name by taking risks, by defying expectations, and by pushing the limits of what was possible. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. This mission would not only be a technological feat, it would be a defining moment for human civilization. "We've worked through the logistics of the mission," Musk continued, pacing in front of the group. "We've tested the technology, and the rockets are ready. But I'm thinking beyond the mission. What comes after we land on Mars? How do we ensure that this isn't just a one-time event, but the beginning of humanity's expansion into the stars?" The room fell silent, the weight of the question hanging in the air. "I'm not talking about just getting to Mars and coming back," Musk said, his voice firm. "I'm talking about creating a self-sustaining colony. We need to build infrastructure, find resources, and figure out how to make life on Mars permanent. This mission is just the first step, but the real work begins once we're there." The team nodded again, understanding the gravity of his words. They knew that what Musk was asking was no small feat. Colonizing another planet required a complete shift in thinking. It wasn't just about exploration. It was about survival, self-sufficiency, and creating a future beyond Earth. "Let's break it down," Musk said, flipping through a series of slides on the screen. "We need 3 key things to make this work: habitat construction, resource utilization, and transportation. We're building the Starship to get us there, But once we're on Mars, we need to create livable environments. And that's going to require new thinking, new technology that doesn't just survive, but thrives in an alien environment. The engineers began to sketch out designs on the whiteboard, offering ideas for habitats that could protect astronauts from the harsh Martian environment. Solar energy, resource extraction, and sustainable living systems were all part of the plan. Every detail, no matter how small, was essential. The team had a singular focus now. Mars was not just a destination, but a new beginning. Elon had always been a man of vision, but even he had moments of doubt. Sitting alone in his office later that evening, he reflected on everything that had brought him to this point. The trials, the setbacks, the obstacles. But he also remembered the feeling when SpaceX had successfully landed its first Falcon 9 rocket, and the pride he felt watching the reusable boosters return to Earth. That moment had proven something fundamental to him. Nothing was impossible. He thought about the people who would be going to Mars, astronauts who had volunteered for the greatest journey mankind had ever attempted. They weren't just pioneers. They were the first humans to take the boldest step in history. Musk stared at the screen in front of him, images of Mars flickering. He had never felt more certain of anything in his life. The future was not on Earth. The future was out there, in the stars, and it was humanity's destiny to reach it. The following weeks were filled with a frenetic pace of planning, testing, and recalibrating. Musk spent hours reviewing mission parameters, considering every contingency, and ensuring that SpaceX's commitment to the mission was unwavering. They had the technology, the ambition, and the resources, but they needed something more: courage. The courage to take the leap into the unknown and push the boundaries of human potential. One day, as the crew finalized the launch plan for the Mars mission, Musk stood at the front of the room. He could feel the anticipation in the air, the excitement building among the team. He could sense that they were all ready, that they were about to change history together. "All right," Musk said, his voice steady and clear. "This is it. We're not just going to Mars. We're going to build a future for humanity. A future that will last long after we're gone. We're going to take the first steps toward making humanity a multiplanetary species. And we're going to do it together." There was a brief silence before the team erupted into applause. Musk stood there, absorbing the moment. This was what he had always dreamed of. This was what he had worked for. And it was finally happening. As the countdown to the Mars mission began, the world watched. The media was abuzz with anticipation, but Musk was focused. This was his moment to prove that the impossible was within reach. The launch window was narrowing, and every moment counted. The day of the launch arrived, and Musk stood in the control room, watching the clock tick down to zero. The spacecraft was ready. The astronauts were strapped in. The world held its breath as the massive Starship rocket stood tall on the launch pad. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The voice of the mission control officer echoed through the room. And with that, the rocket roared to life. The world watched in awe as the Starship soared into the sky, carrying with it not just a crew, but the hopes and dreams of humanity's future. The roar of the rocket engines faded as the spacecraft glided through the Martian atmosphere. Inside the Starship, the astronauts were silent, each lost in their thoughts as the red planet loomed ahead. The journey had been long, difficult, and full of unknowns, but the moment had finally arrived. They were about to make history, about to become the first humans to set foot on Mars. Elon Musk sat in his private quarters in the SpaceX headquarters, watching the live stream of the landing. The room was quiet except for the hum of the computers and the soft click of his fingers on the keyboard as he scrolled through mission data. His eyes were fixed on the screen, where the Starship began its final descent. The team at SpaceX had worked tirelessly to make this day possible, but Musk knew that the real work was just beginning. The spacecraft touched down with a soft thud, its landing legs absorbing the shock as the dust of Mars settled around it. Musk exhaled slowly. It had worked. The first human-made spacecraft had safely landed on the Martian surface. But this was just the beginning. Inside the Starship, Commander Maya Sanchez, the leader of the Mars mission, was the first to speak. "We've made it," she said, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "Mars is now our home." The crew shared a moment of silence, gazing out of the spacecraft's windows at the vast, desolate landscape before them. The red soil stretched out in every direction, as far as the eye could see. They were standing on the surface of another world, a place that had only existed in their wildest dreams. But there was no time for awe. The mission had just begun, and there was much to do. The astronauts had to ensure the stability of their habitat, set up their energy systems, and begin the critical work of resource extraction. Mars was an unforgiving place, and they would need all their skills, innovation, and determination to survive. Back on Earth, Elon watched as the crew disembarked from the spacecraft, stepping onto the Martian soil for the first time. Their footsteps left a lasting imprint, a symbolic moment in history. But Musk knew that every successful mission needed more than just a good landing. It needed a sustainable future. The astronauts were only the first wave. There were more missions to follow, and each one would need to lay the groundwork for future generations to thrive on Mars. How are they doing? Gwynne Shotwell's voice cut through Musk's thoughts, pulling him back to the present. They've landed, Musk replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. The real work starts now. Shotwell nodded, her face set in determination. We've built the technology, we've planned the systems, and we've trained the crew. But the next phase will be the hardest. We need to make this permanent. I know, Musk said quietly, but we're ready. We've taken the first step. Now we need to keep pushing forward. Mars is just the beginning. We're not just sending people to Mars, we're sending humanity's future. Days passed, and the crew on Mars settled into their new routines. The habitat modules were erected, the solar arrays deployed, and the life support systems came online. The harsh Martian winds howled outside, but inside the habitat, the crew was safe. They had everything they needed for the moment, but Musk knew that sustainability would take time. They needed to figure out how to produce oxygen, water, and food on Mars, 3 things that Earth had in abundance but that would be scarce in their new home. Dr. Kavi Patel, the mission's lead scientist, was one of the first to address the pressing issue of resource management. She had been working for months on a plan to create a closed-loop system that would allow the crew to recycle everything, from oxygen to water to waste. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. We need to think bigger, Dr. Patel told Musk in a call from Mars. The technology we've brought with us is capable, but we'll need to expand it quickly. We need to start extracting water from the Martian soil. The sooner we can make that happen, the sooner we can scale up our habitats and start building the infrastructure for the next missions. Musk nodded, his eyes scanning the data on his screen. I agree. Start by setting up the water extraction units. Once we have that, we can begin testing food production systems. Understood. We'll keep you updated as we progress. As the crew on Mars continued to settle in, Musk turned his attention to the next critical phase of the mission, sending more equipment and resources to support the growing colony. SpaceX had been preparing a series of supply missions, each more advanced than the last. The goal was to create a self-sustaining ecosystem on Mars, a place where humans could live, work, and thrive independently of Earth. But there were risks. Mars was still an unknown world. Its atmosphere, its geology, its unpredictable dust storms. Everything about it was a challenge. And even though SpaceX had prepared for every possible contingency, Musk knew that there was always the chance that something would go wrong. That was the nature of the unknown. And yet, it was that very unpredictability that fueled his determination. A few months after the initial landing, the first signs of progress began to show. The habitat on Mars was functioning smoothly, the water extraction process was yielding promising results, and the first crops had begun to grow in the specially designed hydroponic systems. The crew had settled into a rhythm, and despite the challenges, there was a sense of optimism on Mars. They were living in a new world, but they were also building something extraordinary. Back on Earth, the world watched. People who had once been skeptical of Musk's ambitions were now beginning to believe. The impossible was becoming possible. And with each success, Musk's vision of a multi-planetary humanity seemed more and more inevitable. As he stood in the SpaceX control room, watching the live feed from Mars, Elon Musk felt a sense of fulfillment that few others could understand. This was it. The mission was succeeding. The dream was alive. But as always, he was already thinking about the next step. Mars wasn't enough. The universe was vast, and humanity's future was written in the stars. What's next, Elon? Gwynne Shotwell asked, her voice full of anticipation. Musk smiled, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of what was to come. We've made it to Mars, but we're not stopping there. Our future is beyond this planet, beyond the red planet. We're going to build a future among the stars. The real work starts now. And with that, Elon Musk's vision for humanity's future expanded even further, beyond Mars, beyond the solar system, into the farthest reaches of space. The first few months on Mars were filled with excitement and progress. The crew had completed their primary mission objectives, establishing the habitat, securing resources, and starting to grow food. It was a dream come true, but Elon Musk knew better than anyone that the real challenge of space exploration wasn't just getting to a new planet. It was surviving once you got there. For the astronauts on Mars, life had become routine. The days blended together as they carried out their tasks, working on the habitat, maintaining the equipment, and monitoring the life support systems. The early challenges of setting up camp were behind them, but new obstacles were emerging, some of which were impossible to predict. It started with the power grid. Commander Maya Sanchez and Dr. Kavi Patel were in the mission control room, reviewing the data from the power systems when they noticed a concerning trend. The solar panels are underperforming, Maya said, her voice edged with concern. We're losing power output, and it's not just the dust storm that's been rolling in. The panels themselves seem to be losing efficiency. Covey leaned over, examining the figures on the screen. We can handle the dust storms. They come and go. But this might be more than just the weather. The equipment might be malfunctioning, or it could be a deeper issue with the materials we used in the panels. Elon Musk's face appeared on a nearby screen, the familiar figure offering a stern look. What do you need from us? He asked, his tone calm but direct. We need to analyze the solar cells for wear and tear, Maya replied. If it's a design flaw or a fault in the materials, we'll need to start troubleshooting and find a way to make repairs. The backup power systems won't hold out for long under these conditions. Musk nodded. Get me a detailed report as soon as possible. We can send out more equipment on the next resupply mission, but you need to make do with what you have right now. Keep me updated on the situation. The conversation ended, and Maya turned to Covey. We've always known this would be a test of our ingenuity. Time to figure this out. The next few days were a blur of diagnostics and troubleshooting. The dust storm had come and gone, but the solar panels continued to underperform. As the crew worked tirelessly to keep the power running, the situation began to worsen. Without sufficient power, the life support systems would fail. The communication relay would go dark, and the crops they had painstakingly cultivated could die off. Back on Earth, Elon was pacing in his office, running through every possible scenario. He had expected setbacks, but this was different. The power failure wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a potential disaster. He knew the risks, but the stakes had just gotten a whole lot higher. Gwen Shotwell walked in, her expression tight. Elon, we need to talk about the situation. The crew is pushing forward with repairs, but they're running low on time. We may need to send a new mission faster than we planned. Musk paused, looking at the data on his screen. How soon can we get a mission up there? 2 weeks at the earliest, Gwen said, her voice steady but laced with concern. The resupply mission was already scheduled, but we need to make sure we have the right equipment. And it won't be quick. Even with everything ready, it will take time for the rocket to arrive. Elon's mind raced. 2 weeks was a long time in an environment like Mars. The crew's power reserves were already critically low. They couldn't afford to wait that long. We have to find a solution faster, he said, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. We need to get creative. There's got to be something they can do with the resources they have on the ground. Gwen raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Elon looked at her, his eyes narrowing. I'm thinking about the tools we haven't yet used, the ones we've been saving for later stages. Let's start thinking about alternative energy solutions. Can they repurpose the equipment they already have? Gwen paused for a moment, considering the possibility. It's risky, but it's possible. We'll need to give them everything they might need and trust them to figure out how to put it all together. Back on Mars, Maya and Covey were working with the rest of the crew to implement Elon's idea. They had been given a new set of instructions: reuse what they had, improvise with the tools on hand, and keep the power going long enough to make it until the next resupply mission. It was a daunting task. We need to think outside the box, Maya said, looking at the schematic Elon had sent. We've got some spare parts from the life support systems. If we can combine the solar panels with the energy converters, we might be able to generate enough power to get us through. The crew began tearing apart the spare systems and reworking the wiring. It wasn't ideal, nothing about their situation was, but they were learning to make do with what they had. Every day, new challenges arose, but they were met with determination. The crew had come to realize that they weren't just astronauts, they were pioneers in the truest sense of the word. And pioneers don't give up when things get tough. Back on Earth, Elon was receiving real-time updates from the crew. Every time a new issue arose, he pushed himself to think beyond the conventional. He was used to solving problems quickly, but Mars had its own set of rules. No one had ever faced these types of challenges before, and the solutions would need to be just as innovative as the technology that had gotten them there in the first place. "Keep pushing forward," Musk said, his voice calm but resolute as he spoke to Maya over a communication channel. "This is what we've trained for. You're not alone up there." Maya nodded, though she could feel the weight of the challenge. "Understood. We'll keep going. We're going to make this work. Mars isn't going to defeat us." As the days stretched on, the crew began to make slow but steady progress. They repurposed their equipment, rerouted power, and devised makeshift solutions that held the life support systems together. It wasn't perfect, but they were surviving. And then, one morning, something unexpected happened. The backup solar arrays that had been offline began to function again. It wasn't clear why, but the sudden increase in power allowed them to stabilize their systems. The life support was operational once more, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, the crew breathed a collective sigh of relief. "We did it," Covey said, her voice filled with disbelief and triumph. Maya smiled. "We made it through the storm." Elon Musk stood at his desk, staring at the latest update from Mars. He exhaled deeply, his heart still racing from the stress of the past few days. But they had done it. The crew had made it through the first real crisis on Mars, and they had come out stronger for it. For Elon, this wasn't just about technology. It wasn't even about Mars. It was about human willpower, the ability to overcome the impossible and keep moving forward. And if they could survive this, they could survive anything. "Keep going," Musk muttered to himself, his gaze fixed on the stars. "This is just the beginning." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The sense of relief on Mars was short-lived. Just as the crew started to stabilize their operations and regain their footing, another unforeseen obstacle presented itself, one that no amount of preparation could have predicted. It started quietly, with a faint tremor that shook the ground beneath their feet. At first, the crew dismissed it as another minor aftershock from the distant Marsquakes they'd read about during their training. But then it happened again, stronger this time. Maya Sanchez was the first to react. She glanced at the seismic monitors with growing concern. "This doesn't look like a minor tremor," she muttered under her breath. But the others in the control room hadn't yet noticed the change. Dr. Covey Patel, who had been working on adjusting the water extraction systems, froze when the vibrations intensified. Are we experiencing an earthquake?" she asked, looking up at Maya. Before Maya could respond, the ground shook violently, causing the metallic walls of the habitat to groan and vibrate. The lights flickered, and the air vent system sputtered, cutting in and out as the tremors intensified. The emergency alarms blared. It was no longer a simple disturbance. This was a full-blown seismic event. "Everyone to the central control room now," Maya ordered. The crew quickly gathered their gear and made their way to the most fortified part of the habitat as the shaking continued. As they huddled together in the central control room, Maya and Covey exchanged worried glances. The habitat had been designed to withstand the Martian environment, but they hadn't accounted for something like this, a sudden, powerful quake that could compromise the structure. If the habitat itself was damaged, their survival could be at risk. "We need to assess the damage immediately," Maya said, trying to stay calm despite the panic she could hear in the voices of the crew. "Covey, I need you to check the integrity of the life support systems. The last thing we need right now is a failure in oxygen production." Covey nodded, running off to her station. Meanwhile, Maya turned to the others. We've trained for emergencies, and this is just another challenge we need to face. Keep calm, focus on your tasks, and stay alert. The tremors lasted for several minutes before slowly subsiding. Silence fell over the habitat, broken only by the hum of the backup systems coming online. Maya exhaled, but the tension in the room was palpable. Is everyone accounted for? She asked, her voice now steady but full of concern. Yes, Covey called out from the control panel, her hands flying over the buttons. The systems are intact for now, but we're going to need to perform a full inspection. The Martian surface is more unstable than we thought. This could be a warning of more seismic activity to come. Elon Musk was already receiving updates from the team. His screen flickered to life with the report from Maya. His fingers paused for a moment on the keyboard as he read the details. Elon, this is serious. Maya's voice came through the communication link. We've just experienced a significant seismic event. The habitat is intact for now, but we don't know what kind of aftershocks to expect. We need to reassess our safety protocols and infrastructure. Elon stared at the screen, his brow furrowed. He had known that the harsh Martian environment posed risks, but this, an earthquake of all things, was something none of them had been prepared for. You're going to need to perform a full structural inspection, Musk replied, his voice firm. And don't take any chances. If the habitat's stability is compromised, we'll need to pull back and make repairs immediately. Maya nodded, though Elon couldn't see it. Understood. We'll keep you updated. On Earth, the news of the earthquake on Mars sent waves of shock and concern through SpaceX's headquarters. Gwynne Shotwell and the team immediately began coordinating with Mission Control to ensure the crew had everything they needed to weather the crisis. But even as they scrambled to assess the situation, Musk's mind was already moving forward. Mars was full of unknowns, whether it was dust storms, radiation, or earthquakes, and Musk was keenly aware that every new setback brought with it an opportunity to learn and grow. This was all part of the bigger picture. Establishing humanity on Mars was never going to be easy, but failure wasn't an option. We need to focus on ensuring the crew's safety, Gwynne said, her voice resolute as she spoke to Elon. They're in a vulnerable position right now. If the habitat is compromised, we may need to send an evacuation mission sooner than planned. Elon shook his head, pacing around his office. The mission can't end here. We've come too far. Let's focus on getting them the resources they need to continue the inspection. I'm sure they can stabilize the situation. Let's get them what they need for repairs. If the habitat can withstand this quake, we've got a chance. Back on Mars, the crew got to work. Dr. Patel immediately started testing the oxygen production systems, checking the pressure in the life support system, and ensuring that all the environmental controls were still functioning. The backup oxygen reserves were full, but if the quake had damaged the primary life support systems, they could be in trouble. Maya and the rest of the team began inspecting the structural integrity of the habitat. They checked the walls, the airlocks, the joints where the modules were connected. The structure had held up well in the quake, but they knew they couldn't afford to miss any signs of damage. Everything looks stable, Covey said, wiping the sweat from her brow. But we need to be careful. If we get another quake, it could cause some of the systems to fail. We'll keep monitoring the situation, Maya replied. And if we have to, we'll enact emergency procedures. But the risk wasn't just about physical damage. It was about the unknowns. Mars was an alien world, with its own set of unpredictable variables. Seismic activity, dust storms, radiation. These were dangers they couldn't control. The crew on Mars was not just surviving. They were navigating a hostile world, one that had no mercy for mistakes. As the hours passed, the crew managed to stabilize their systems, and it appeared that the worst of the seismic event was over. The second aftershock that had been predicted didn't materialize, and the structural integrity of the habitat held up. But the crew couldn't relax just yet. They had learned a valuable lesson. Mars was not to be underestimated. On Earth, Elon Musk sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he watched the latest updates from Mars. It was clear that this event had been a test of both the technology and the crew's ability to adapt under pressure. Elon, Gwynne said, walking into his office with a clipboard in hand. The crew's stabilizing the situation for now. They're preparing for the next steps, But this earthquake has shifted the timeline for some of our other missions. Musk nodded, his expression unreadable. We knew Mars would be a challenge. The unpredictable nature of the planet is part of what makes it exciting. But this is also a reminder that we need to be ready for anything. Gwyn agreed. Right. We're in this for the long haul. Musk smiled slightly, his eyes lighting up with resolve. Exactly. And if there's one thing I know about the human spirit, it's that we don't back down from a challenge. We rise to meet it. The weeks following the earthquake had been filled with uncertainty. The tremors had left the crew shaken, both literally and figuratively, but they had managed to stabilize their systems. Power levels were back to normal, and their habitat remained intact. However, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that Mars was sending them a message. Nothing here was predictable. Maya Sanchez sat at the communications console, scanning the data from their most recent seismic sensors. The shaking from the earthquake had subsided, but the readings weren't entirely stable. There was still a possibility of further quakes. The team had decided to increase safety protocols, just in case. How are we holding up on water and food supplies? She asked, turning to Dr. Kavi Patel, who was sitting at her desk in the corner, absorbed in her reports. We're good for now, Kavi replied, not looking up. Water reserves are holding steady, and the crops are growing slowly but surely. If anything, the earthquake gave us a reason to double-check our contingency plans. Maya nodded. Good. We can't afford another surprise. We need to be prepared for anything. As the day wore on, the crew worked tirelessly to continue their mission objectives while also securing the habitat from any possible aftershocks. But despite their best efforts, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone was on edge, watching for any signs of trouble. Just when it seemed like things might finally settle down, another unexpected event occurred, one that would change everything for the crew on Mars. Back on Earth, Elon Musk had been keeping a close eye on the Mars mission's progress, though he hadn't anticipated this new challenge. The earthquake had been a wake-up call, but the team on the ground had managed to handle it with remarkable poise. Yet, the next situation was much more urgent. Gwyn Shotwell's phone buzzed with an incoming alert. She glanced at the screen, and her face immediately hardened. She quickly tapped a few buttons, pulling up a satellite feed. Elon, we've got a problem, she said, walking into his office without waiting for a response. There's been a significant delay in the next resupply mission to Mars. The cargo ship won't be able to launch for at least another 48 hours due to unforeseen weather conditions at the launch site. We're looking at a potential delay of 2 to 3 weeks before the crew gets their next supplies. Elon looked up sharply, his mind racing. How critical are the supplies? Are they running low on anything important? We've been monitoring their status closely, Gwyn replied, her expression serious. The crew has been working with the bare minimum, but they're doing all right for now. The problem is, if the resupply doesn't arrive on time, they could be in trouble. They'll be fine for a while, but the more time passes, the higher the risk. Elon stood, moving toward the window as he processed the news. I need to talk to the crew. They won't like hearing about this, but we need to keep them calm. We can't let panic set in. Gwyn nodded. I'll get the communication link ready. Back on Mars, Maya was going over the crew's daily reports when the communications console pinged. It was a direct line from Earth, marked as high priority. She immediately stepped up to take the call. Elon, what's going on? She asked, though she already had a sinking feeling in her stomach. Listen carefully, Maya. Elon's voice crackled over the line, steady but with an undercurrent of urgency. There's been a significant delay in the resupply mission. We're looking at an additional 2 to 3 weeks before we can get you the supplies you need. Maya's stomach dropped. That's not good. How are we supposed to make it for another 3 weeks with minimal resources? I know this isn't ideal, Elon replied, but I believe in your team. You've been resourceful so far, and I know you can manage. I'll be with you every step of the way, and we'll continue to monitor the situation. Keep doing what you're doing, and if anything changes, let me know immediately. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, her mind racing. They had been running on reserves, but an additional 2 to 3 weeks was a long time. Would they have enough food? What if another disaster struck? Understood, Elon, Maya said finally, her voice calm despite the anxiety creeping in. We'll keep things stable for as long as we can, but we're going to need to prioritize our resources from here on out." With that call, the tension in the habitat reached new heights. Maya called a meeting with the entire crew to discuss the situation. "Everyone, listen up," she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the news. "The resupply mission has been delayed. We're looking at a minimum of 2 to 3 weeks before we get any new supplies." The room went quiet, the gravity of the situation settling in. "How long can we last?" Covey asked, breaking the silence. She sounded composed, but Maya could hear the worry beneath her words. "We'll be fine for a while," Maya answered, "but we need to start rationing food and water. We're going to have to stretch everything as far as it can go." "What about the solar power system?" one of the engineers, Ben, asked. "Is there any way we can generate more energy to extend the life of our resources?" "We're already running at max capacity with the solar panels," Maya replied. "Unless we get another breakthrough, we're stuck with what we have." Maya could see the concern written on each of their faces. This wasn't just a matter of surviving. It was a matter of holding on long enough to get through the crisis. "Listen," Maya said, trying to sound more hopeful. "We've been through worse. We'll figure it out. We always do. For now, we stay focused. We ration what we can, stay on top of repairs, and keep an eye out for any signs of danger. If we do this right, we'll make it through." The crew exchanged determined looks. They had faced challenges before, but this was different. There was no immediate rescue on the way. The next few weeks would be their hardest test yet. Back on Earth, Elon Musk sat in his office, staring at the screen in front of him. He had watched the footage of the crew on Mars, their faces filled with determination. He believed in them completely, but he also knew they were in uncharted territory. "What do we do now?" Gwen asked, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. "We keep pushing forward," Elon replied. "They're not alone. We've got to find a way to get them what they need, and we'll make it happen." But in the back of his mind, he knew that no amount of planning could prepare them for what was coming next. The news of the resupply delay continued to reverberate throughout the crew. The once hopeful atmosphere that had accompanied their first months on Mars had given way to a palpable tension. There was no panic, at least not yet, but there was a sense of urgency and responsibility in the air. Every decision, no matter how small, now felt like it could mean the difference between survival and failure. Maya Sanchez sat in the control room, her eyes fixed on the display showing the status of the habitat systems. It was almost like a game of chess, calculating, adjusting, predicting moves that could ensure their survival. But there was no board, no simple rules. Every move carried weight, every risk could lead to unforeseen consequences. "How are we on water, Covey?" Maya asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. Covey Patel, who had been monitoring the water purification system, looked up from her console. "The recycling system is holding steady, but we're reaching a tipping point. If we can't find a way to improve the efficiency of the water production, we'll need to ration it even more strictly. Right now, we're on track to last about 2 weeks if we stick to the minimum usage plan." Maya's mind raced. 2 weeks wasn't long enough. It wasn't enough time to stretch their limited resources, nor did it give them any leeway if something went wrong. The next resupply could take weeks longer, and they had no way of knowing if the supplies would arrive on time. "Ben," she called out to the habitat engineer, who had been working on optimizing their power systems. "What's the latest with the solar panels? Can we get more energy from them to power the water system?" Ben wiped sweat from his forehead and turned to face her. "We're already running them at maximum efficiency. The issue isn't power generation. It's the efficiency of the water system itself. If we're going to last, we need to maximize every drop of water we have." A heavy silence followed his words. The crew had faced many challenges, but this one was different. Water was essential, and without it, nothing else mattered. "Okay," Maya said, standing up. "We need to think outside the box. Let's start testing the humidity levels in the atmosphere. If we can find a way to extract even a small amount of water from the air, we could extend our supplies by days, maybe even weeks." The crew nodded. It was a long shot, but they had learned quickly that survival on Mars was often a matter of trial and error. Innovation, resourcefulness, and determination were their best tools. Back on Earth, Elon Musk had been following the updates from the crew on Mars. The delay in the resupply mission had thrown everything into chaos, but he was resolute in his belief that they could make it through this. If anyone could, it was his team. Elon sat in a virtual meeting with his engineers and mission control team, strategizing about how to support the crew on Mars without direct intervention. The delay in the cargo mission was unavoidable, but that didn't mean they couldn't help the crew in other ways. Elon, Gwen Shotwell said, her voice cutting through the conversation, we've been looking at potential solutions for the water shortage. There's a possibility we can send a new type of atmospheric water collector on the next cargo launch. It's not ideal, but it could help. Elon's eyes lit up. How soon can we get that tech to Mars? It'll take a few weeks to integrate it into the mission, but if we make it a priority, we might be able to get it there faster, Gwen replied. Elon nodded. Do whatever it takes. The crew needs that system, and we can't afford any delays. Let's get that in the next launch, no matter what. He paused for a moment, staring at the map of Mars on his screen. And what about the food supply? How soon before they run low? We've been monitoring their consumption, Gwen said. If they ration strictly, they should be able to make the food last for about 3 weeks. Beyond that, things get tricky. We need to get them some supplies sooner rather than later. Elon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. We have to stay ahead of this. Let's focus on getting them the most critical supplies. Water and food first, and then we'll look at everything else. Back on Mars, Maya stood with Covey, staring at the newly assembled water extractor. It was an experimental device designed to capture moisture from the thin Martian atmosphere, a concept that Elon had insisted was worth exploring. They weren't expecting miracles, but every drop counted. Covey adjusted a few knobs and pressed a button. The machine hummed to life, its small fans whirring softly as it began pulling in air. The crew watched with bated breath as it processed the atmosphere and released a small amount of water into a collection tray. It's working, Covey said, a relieved smile spreading across her face. Not much, but it's a start. Maya examined the tray. How much do you think we can collect in a day? Maybe a liter, maybe a little less, depending on the humidity, Covey replied. It's not perfect, but it's something. Maya nodded. That's progress. Let's keep testing it. Every drop counts. The rest of the crew rallied around the new system. They worked together to refine it, figuring out ways to extract as much water as possible from the atmosphere. It wasn't the miracle solution they had hoped for, but it was a vital lifeline. The next few days brought a series of small victories. Ben and the engineering team improved the efficiency of their solar panels even further, optimizing their power output to help run the water extraction system. Covey and Maya worked with the other scientists to improve crop yields by adjusting the habitat's environment, and slowly but surely, they were getting ahead of the worst of their resource constraints. But the days felt longer, and the tension never fully dissipated. Every time a slight issue arose, whether it was a system failure, a malfunctioning piece of equipment, or a sudden shortage of a necessary material, the crew felt the weight of their precarious situation. They had no immediate backup, no resupply teams at the ready. If something went wrong, it was on them to fix it. The bond between the crew members had deepened, their shared hardship creating a sense of unity that transcended their individual fears. They weren't just co-workers or scientists anymore. They were a team, bound together by the struggle to survive in a world that didn't care about their efforts. On Earth, Elon Musk watched the crew's progress with cautious optimism. He knew that the delay in the resupply mission had tested them, but he also saw how the crew had adapted to their circumstances. This was exactly what he had envisioned when he first launched the Mars mission. The ability to adapt, innovate, and rise to the challenge, no matter how overwhelming it seemed. He stood at the window of his office, looking out over the horizon, his thoughts distant. "They'll make it," he murmured to himself. "They always do." But even as he spoke those words, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. The following weeks were a blur of intense focus, problem-solving, and mounting tension. Despite the successful implementation of the atmospheric water extraction system, the team knew their survival depended on more than just a few liters of water. Every day was a balancing act, carefully monitoring their resources while continuing to push forward with their mission objectives. Maya Sanchez walked through the habitat's corridors, her boots tapping softly on the metal floor. The place felt both suffocatingly small and vast at the same time. With limited space, they were forced to live in close quarters, but Mars itself, this barren, unforgiving planet, was as vast and inhospitable as it had ever been. They were literally standing on the edge of humanity's greatest challenge, and yet, the very idea of failure seemed impossible to entertain. As she passed the control room, she noticed Dr. Kavi Patel huddled over a screen, her brow furrowed with concentration. Maya stopped, hesitated for a moment, then entered. "Everything okay, Kavi?" she asked, walking up behind her. Kavi didn't immediately turn, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm just looking at the atmospheric pressure readings again," she said, her voice low but focused. "Something's off. The weather on Mars has been unusual. We've had more dust storms than usual, and the atmospheric pressure is fluctuating more than we've expected. If the dust storms keep up, we could see another wave of problems for our solar panels." Maya stared at the data, her mind racing. If the solar panels start failing again, we could lose power. We can't afford that right now. Covey nodded grimly. "Exactly. And we've already exhausted most of the backup power solutions we had in place. If we don't get those panels back online soon, we might be facing a more significant energy crisis." The urgency in Covey's voice caught Maya's attention. They had already weathered so much. The last thing they needed was another system failure, especially one that affected the vital resources they had so carefully rationed. "What are our options?" Covey turned to face her, her expression a mixture of concern and resolve. "We might need to take a more drastic approach. The only thing that could give us some extra power is the geothermal system we've been testing. It's not fully operational, but if we can get it up and running faster than expected, it might buy us some time." Maya's eyes narrowed. "A geothermal system? That's risky. Are you sure it's safe?" Covey sighed. "It's not perfect, but it's our best option. I'd rather risk it than lose everything we've worked for." Maya exhaled slowly, glancing at the ceiling as though searching for the right words. Finally, she nodded. "All right, let's give it a shot." Meanwhile, back on Earth, Elon Musk was beginning to feel the weight of the decisions he had made for the Mars mission. The situation on Mars had become more complex than he had initially anticipated. While he trusted the crew to handle the crisis, the looming danger that the resources could run out still gnawed at him. He sat in his office, staring at the virtual display of the Mars base, seeing the real-time footage of the crew's activities. The weight of his decisions hung heavy on him, but he knew he couldn't afford to show any signs of doubt. The crew needed leadership more than ever. If they sensed any hesitation from him, the delicate balance they had fought so hard to establish could collapse. Gwyn Shotwell walked in quietly, pulling Elon out of his thoughts. "We've been getting reports from the crew about the geothermal plan," she said, sitting down across from him. "They're moving forward with it, but it's risky. They're looking for a way to increase their power generation, but it could destabilize their environment if something goes wrong." Elon leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "I trust them. If they think it's the right move, then we support them. We can't afford to let this drag on any longer." "I agree," Gwyn said, "but we should still monitor it closely. If anything goes wrong, we need to be ready to respond immediately." Elon nodded. "We're ready. We'll have eyes on everything. Keep pushing for the resupply mission. If we can't get the supplies there sooner, we might have to start looking at other options for support." Back on Mars, Maya and Covey led the crew as they began to set up the geothermal system. The equipment had been part of the long-term mission plan, but it wasn't meant to be activated until much later. Now, with the solar panels under threat from ongoing dust storms, it became their best chance at stabilizing their power supply. Ben, the engineer, took the lead, directing the team as they connected wires and calibrated sensors. He paused for a moment to wipe the sweat from his brow. "We need to be careful with this," he warned. "If we don't get the parameters right, we could create a cascade failure. This system wasn't designed for long-term use yet." "We know the risks," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "But if we don't take this chance, we might be out of options." Covey, who had been monitoring the data, spoke up. "If we can get the system running at even half capacity, it should be enough to stabilize our power for the next few weeks. But we need to be vigilant. If anything looks off, we shut it down immediately." As the crew worked, Maya kept her mind focused on the bigger picture. Every action they took, no matter how small, had the potential to make or break their survival. The geothermal system was their best bet for now, but it was still uncertain. Hours passed, and finally, the system roared to life. The machines hummed with power, slowly stabilizing the habitat's energy reserves. The team watched in silence, each person acutely aware of the potential consequences of any misstep. But for now, it seemed to be working. The geothermal system was functioning, and the power levels were beginning to stabilize. Maya felt a fleeting moment of relief. They had averted another crisis, for now, but she knew it wouldn't be long before something else would challenge them. Survival on Mars wasn't just about managing resources, it was about dealing with the unexpected. And the unexpected was always just around the corner. Back on Earth, Elon had been closely following the success of the geothermal system activation. He saw the real-time reports that the system had stabilized their power reserves, giving them enough energy to continue operating. But he also understood that this was a temporary solution. Mars was a harsh, unpredictable planet. There was no guarantee that this new system would continue to perform as expected. As Elon stood before his team in a virtual meeting, he addressed them with a calm but resolute tone. "We're doing everything we can to support the crew. They've proven their resilience time and time again, and I'm confident they'll continue to push through. But we need to stay proactive. We need to find a way to get them the supplies they need sooner. Every minute counts." Gwen nodded, a determined look on her face. "We're in constant contact with the next resupply mission. We're pushing every possible lever to get those supplies to Mars faster." Elon turned to the map of Mars, his finger tracing the path from Earth to the red planet. "They've made it this far. We won't let them down now." As the Martian days passed, each one felt like a countdown ticking down to an uncertain future. The tension in the habitat was palpable. Every small challenge, every unexpected issue, carried with it the weight of life or death. Maya Sanchez felt the pressure more keenly than ever. They had a fragile hold on survival, and the clock was ticking faster with each passing day. Despite the success of the geothermal system, they were still vulnerable. The dust storms raged on, continuing to disrupt their solar power generation, making the additional power from the geothermal system all the more essential. Yet, the system was only a temporary fix. If the storms didn't abate soon, they would face more problems than they could handle. Water remained their most pressing issue. Every drop collected from the atmospheric water extractor was precious, but it wasn't enough to fully meet the crew's needs. Maya sat at the control station, her eyes scanning the data feeds. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the habitat's operations, but today was different. Today, something felt off. The air seemed thicker, the pressure in the room heavier. There were still too many unknowns. Her thoughts were interrupted by Covey's voice over the comms. "Maya, we need to talk. Something's wrong with the geothermal system. It's fluctuating more than it should. We need to check it before it goes critical." Maya stood up instantly, her heart racing. "On my way," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. In the geothermal control room, Covey was already examining the data logs. Her face was set in concentration, the glow from the monitors illuminating her features. Maya entered, feeling the intensity in the air. "I've been monitoring the temperature fluctuations," Covey said without looking up. "The system isn't maintaining the pressure as we'd expected. If we don't fix it soon, it could lead to a cascade failure. We might lose our power supply altogether." Maya's mind raced. "How long do we have?" Covey paused, her fingers tapping rapidly on the keyboard. "Hard to say. It could be hours. It could be days. But either way, we can't afford to wait." Maya took a deep breath. "All right, let's get to work. Ben, I need you down here now." Moments later, Ben joined them, his face set with determination. The crew had faced obstacles before, but this felt different. They were running out of time, and they had no room for error. "I've reviewed the system schematics," Ben said, looking over Covey's shoulder. "It's not ideal, but I think we can reroute the pressure flow manually to buy us some time. It won't fix the root cause, but it'll keep the system stable until we can figure out the long-term solution." Maya nodded. "Do it. We don't have a choice." The three of them worked quickly, analyzing the data and making the necessary adjustments. Covey adjusted the readings on her console, while Ben worked with the manual controls. The process was delicate. Every change had the potential to send the system spiraling out of control. But time was their enemy. Every minute counted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they made the last adjustment. The system hummed, its pressure stabilizing as the immediate crisis was averted. "We've bought ourselves a little more time," Ben said, his voice strained but hopeful. "But we need to figure out the root cause, and fast." Maya exhaled in relief. "Good work, both of you. We'll keep monitoring it, but we've got a little more breathing room." Back on Earth, Elon Musk was kept up to date on the situation by his team. The news from Mars wasn't encouraging. Yet again, the crew was facing a critical failure, this time with the geothermal system. He sat in his office, a slight frown creasing his brow. They were pushing every resource they had to the limit, but the problems just kept piling up. How much longer could they survive on their ingenuity alone? Elon's mind raced as he stared at the virtual map of Mars, watching the weather data for any signs of change. The dust storms were relentless, and every storm that rolled through had the potential to destroy any gains they made in their efforts. The supply mission was still weeks away at best, and there was no guarantee it would arrive on time. "Any updates from the crew?" Elon asked Gwen, who was standing by with her team. Gwen nodded grimly. "They've made a temporary fix to the geothermal system, but it's not a permanent solution. They'll need to isolate the underlying issue soon or risk losing all power. We've also been hearing reports about the water extractor system. They're getting small amounts, but it's still nowhere near enough to sustain them." Elon's jaw tightened. "We need to get them the supplies, Gwen. I don't care what it takes. Find a way to get them what they need. Now." "I'm on it," Gwen said. "We've accelerated the resupply mission, but there are still logistical hurdles. It's not going to be easy, but we're doing everything we can." Back on Mars, Maya gathered the crew together in the common area. The news about the geothermal system had been worrying, but for now, they had a temporary solution. They couldn't afford to dwell on it. They had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. "We've got some good news and some bad news," Maya began, addressing the crew. "The geothermal system is stable for now, but we can't afford to rely on it long term. We've isolated the problem, but it'll take time to fix. We need to stay vigilant, keep our resources to a minimum, and most importantly, we need to keep working on the water extraction system. Covey and Ben are on it, but we all need to pitch in." There was a quiet murmur of agreement from the crew. They were used to challenges by now, but the fear that came with each new crisis was undeniable. They knew that their survival depended on their ability to adapt, to fight through each new obstacle, but they also knew that it couldn't last forever. "We're going to make it through this," Maya said, her voice steady. "We've gotten this far, and we'll keep going. Together." The days that followed were a blur of calculations, repairs, and relentless work. As the crew tried to address the issues with the geothermal system and continue refining their water extraction process, the pressure mounted. Every day that passed felt like a victory, but it was a fragile one. Back on Earth, Elon Musk continued to push for faster solutions. He knew that the next few weeks could be make or break for the Mars mission. Every decision mattered. Every detail could be the difference between survival and failure. Elon had always been a risk-taker, willing to push the boundaries of what was possible. But as the pressure mounted, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. Could they make it? Could they really survive this long isolation on Mars? He forced the thought aside. There was no room for doubt, not now. The mission was bigger than just the crew on Mars. It was bigger than him. It was humanity's first real step toward becoming a multi-planetary species. And if they were going to make it, they would need to do it together. The constant pressure of survival weighed heavily on the Mars crew. Each day felt like a tightrope walk. One misstep, one unexpected disaster, and everything could collapse. The geothermal system, although temporarily stabilized, remained a looming concern. The storms showed no signs of letting up, and their limited supply of water continued to dwindle. In the dim light of the habitat's common area, the crew gathered again, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but also with determination. Maya Sanchez stood before them, her expression steady but empathetic. She knew how close they were to the edge, but they couldn't let that fear overwhelm them. "Not now. I know this is tough," Maya began, her voice firm yet reassuring. We've faced setbacks, and we're still dealing with issues we didn't anticipate. But I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far. We're still here, and that means something. We're not giving up. Not today. Not ever. The crew nodded, but there was an underlying sense of urgency in the room. They couldn't afford to be complacent. They had to push forward, no matter what. But that meant taking risks. And in their situation, every decision had consequences. Kavi Patel, the mission's lead scientist, spoke up. Maya, I think we may have something here. It's not much, but it's a breakthrough. Her voice cracked slightly with the weight of her words, a rare moment of vulnerability in an otherwise composed woman. Maya's heart raced. What are you saying? I've been working with the atmospheric water extractor, Covey continued, her fingers running through the data logs. We've been collecting water, but it's been so little, barely enough for us to survive on. But if we make one more adjustment, I think we can boost efficiency. We'll still be in a tight spot, but it could make all the difference. Maya leaned forward. How much more can we collect? Covey hesitated. We could double our intake. It's not going to solve everything, but it will buy us more time. Enough time to stabilize the other systems. Enough time until the resupply mission gets here. There was a collective sigh of relief in the room. Double the intake would mean fewer resources used and less reliance on other, more unstable systems. It wasn't a miracle, but it was the first real hope they'd seen in weeks. Let's do it, Maya said, her tone resolute. Covey Ben, you two take the lead on this. The rest of us will keep monitoring the geothermal system. We need to stay on top of everything. As the team got to work, the tension in the habitat eased slightly. There was a renewed sense of focus as each member of the crew threw themselves into their tasks, working with a sense of urgency but also with a flicker of hope. If the water extractor could be optimized, it might be the key to their survival. It was a small victory, but it was theirs. While Covey and Ben worked on tweaking the extractor, Maya took a moment to step outside the habitat. The Martian winds howled across the barren landscape, carrying with them the swirling dust that seemed to never cease. Mars was unforgiving, relentless. But even in its harshness, there was beauty, an overwhelming, untouched beauty that few had ever seen in person. Maya's gaze wandered to the horizon, where the setting sun cast a faint, reddish glow across the vast desert. It was hard to believe that, just a few months ago, this place had seemed like an unimaginable frontier. And yet, here they were, a tiny group of humans, far from Earth, hanging on by the slimmest of margins. Every day they fought for survival, hoping that the next step forward would lead them to safety. How's it going, Maya? Ben's voice broke her from her thoughts. He had come outside to check on her, his face shaded by his helmet visor. She gave him a small smile. It's going. We might have a way to make it work, Ben. The water extractor's showing promise. If we can get it up and running at full capacity, we'll have enough to get by until the resupply mission arrives. Ben nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. It's a start. We've all been pushing for something to go right. This could be the break we need. Maya looked back toward the habitat, her mind racing. The water, the geothermal system, the growing uncertainty of whether the resupply mission would arrive on time. Everything was still hanging by a thread, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of optimism. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Nothing about life on Mars had been easy, but the crew had come this far. They had faced every challenge, every obstacle, and somehow, against all odds, they had made it through. They weren't giving up. Not now. Not ever. Back on Earth, Elon Musk stared at the live feed of the Mars habitat, his brow furrowed with concern. The situation was becoming more dire with each passing day. The resupply mission was still too far out, and though the team on Mars was making progress, it wasn't enough to guarantee their long-term survival. How's the water situation on Mars? Elon asked, his voice tinged with impatience as he addressed his team. Better, Gwen Shotwell replied. The crew managed to boost the efficiency of the atmospheric water extractor. It's not a huge improvement, but it will buy them more time. They're working on other fixes to keep the habitat stable, but everything depends on that resupply mission. Elon nodded, staring at the screen in front of him. And the mission? Can we get them the supplies faster? Gwen hesitated. We're pushing every resource we have. We've accelerated the launch date, but the window is still tight. The payload is ready, but it's a long journey. Even with the accelerated schedule, it'll take weeks for the supplies to arrive. Elon's eyes narrowed. Weeks? We don't have that long. We can't risk waiting. There has to be another way. He leaned forward, his mind working through the options. There had to be something they could do, some way to get the supplies to Mars sooner. It wasn't just about logistics anymore. It was about survival. If the crew ran out of critical resources before the resupply arrived, it would be catastrophic. We'll keep exploring every option, Gwen said. But the reality is, we're on the clock. Every day counts. Elon clenched his jaw. The stakes had never been higher. They couldn't afford failure, not now. Back on Mars, Covey and Ben worked late into the night, tweaking the water extractor system and monitoring every shift in the data. With each small improvement, their spirits lifted. The process wasn't flawless, but the numbers were clear. They were extracting more water, and that was a victory in itself. It wasn't just about surviving another day. It was about creating the momentum they needed to push through the next challenge. And for the first time in weeks, there was a sense of real progress. The water extractor hummed steadily in the background, and as Covey entered the final set of adjustments, she turned to Ben with a tired but triumphant smile. "We did it," she said, her voice light with disbelief. "We actually did it. The water intake is at optimal levels." Ben let out a relieved breath, his eyes wide with exhaustion but full of gratitude. "This is it, Covey. This is what we needed." Maya, overhearing the conversation, entered the room, her face lighting up as she heard the news. "That's amazing. This gives us the breathing room we need. Well done, both of you." It was a small victory, but in a world where every small success was hard-won, it felt monumental. For the first time in a long while, the crew allowed themselves a moment of relief. They were still alive, and they still had a fighting chance. The news of the water extractor's success had lifted the crew's spirits, but they knew that hope, no matter how fleeting, could only go so far. They were still in the wilderness of space, isolated on a hostile planet with limited resources. Every day they survived felt like a small miracle, but miracles couldn't last forever. Maya Sanchez sat in the command room, staring at the screen in front of her. The numbers looked good, the water levels were stabilizing, the geothermal system was holding up. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel a sense of relief. But something nagged at her, a feeling deep in her gut that wouldn't let go. The resupply mission was still too far out. The storms continued to rage, and with them came new complications. "Anything new from Earth?" Maya asked as she turned to Covey, who had been monitoring communications. Covey shook her head. "Not yet. The resupply mission is still scheduled for 2 weeks, but there's no guarantee it'll arrive on time. We're still too far off from the resupply point." Maya sighed, leaning back in her chair. 2 weeks. It feels like a lifetime. There was a brief silence before Ben, who had been quietly working in the corner, looked up. "I'm noticing a drop in the geothermal pressure." Again. Maya's heart sank. "How bad is it?" Ben didn't hesitate. "It's not catastrophic yet, but if this continues, we could lose power. That would take down everything. Water, air filtration, heating. We'd be back to square one." The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. They were already teetering on the edge, and now it felt as though everything was beginning to crumble. The water was a temporary lifeline, but without power, none of it would matter. "We can't afford another failure," Maya said, her voice steely. "We need to fix this now." The crew worked through the night, trying to stabilize the geothermal system. Every possible solution was considered, each idea tested. It felt like they were fighting an invisible enemy, one that shifted and changed with each new challenge. No matter what they tried, the system kept losing pressure, inch by inch. Every time they thought they had it fixed, the numbers would fall again. By the time the sun rose over the Martian horizon, everyone was drained. The exhaustion was written on their faces, but there was no room for rest. They had to keep going. Failure wasn't an option. Maya stood over the geothermal controls, her eyes scanning the data. Covey joined her, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We're close, Maya. If we can reconfigure the flow distribution, it might hold steady for a while. It's risky, but it might buy us some time. Maya knew what that meant. They had already been on the edge of their resources. A risky move now could mean disaster if it didn't work. How long would it hold if we do that? Maya asked. Could be hours. Could be days. But we'd be pushing the system beyond its limits. If we're lucky, it'll last long enough for the resupply mission to arrive, Covey replied. Maya's mind raced. They had no choice but to take the risk. Do it. The room was silent except for the hum of machinery and the occasional clicking of fingers against keyboards. Covey and Ben worked together, adjusting the pressure controls, rerouting the energy flow to redistribute power. It was a delicate operation. One mistake, and everything could fail. Maya watched anxiously, feeling every second tick by with unbearable slowness. They had pushed the system to its limits before, but this time felt different. If the geothermal system failed now, it would mean the end of their survival. The final adjustment was made. The system hummed to life, its pressure readings stabilizing for the first time in hours. A collective sigh of relief passed through the room, but Maya wasn't ready to celebrate yet. They had been in this situation before, where things seemed to improve only to collapse again without warning. Let's keep monitoring, Maya said, her voice steady but cautious. We need to know if this is really going to hold. Hours passed, and the crew worked in shifts, monitoring the data with unblinking eyes. The geothermal system held steady for now, its pressure readings consistent, but it was still fragile, and the crew knew it. They had bought themselves some time, but how much was anyone's guess? In the control room, Maya sat alone for a moment, staring at the data feeds. The silence in the room was almost deafening. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you were teetering on the edge of something larger, something inevitable. As the days wore on, the atmosphere in the habitat began to shift. The crew was tired of the constant struggle, the constant fight to stay alive. They had become so focused on surviving that they had lost sight of what it meant to live. But then, in the middle of this uncertainty, something remarkable happened. Maya was in the kitchen area when she heard Covey's voice crackling over the comms. Maya, you need to see this, Covey said urgently. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the control room, where Covey and Ben were staring at the screen, their faces illuminated by the glow of the data. We just got a communication from Earth, Covey said, her voice trembling with excitement. The resupply mission is on its way, early. They've managed to get it to Mars faster than we anticipated. Maya's eyes widened, disbelief creeping into her thoughts. Are you serious? Ben nodded, a grin slowly spreading across his face. They're making it happen. We're going to get the supplies we need. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Maya felt a genuine wave of hope wash over her. The resupply mission wasn't just coming. They had pulled it off sooner than anyone had expected. This wasn't just a small miracle. It was a game changer. Back on Earth, Elon Musk paced back and forth in his office, his eyes never leaving the live feed from Mars. The resupply mission was ahead of schedule, a major breakthrough in a situation that had seemed impossible only days before. But he wasn't ready to celebrate. There were still too many uncertainties. Are we sure the crew is ready for this? Elon asked, his voice tight with concern. We've been in constant communication, Gwen answered. They've had their struggles, but they've managed. The adjustments they made to the water system are holding steady. The pressure on the geothermal system is down for now, and they've made some improvements. The supplies are already in transit, and we're doing everything we can to keep them on track. Elon nodded, his mind still on the crew. They had done the unthinkable. They had survived against all odds. And now, they just needed to hang on a little longer. Keep me updated, Elon said, his voice steady. We're not out of the woods yet. Not by a long shot. On Mars, the crew gathered together once more, their faces tired but bright with hope. They still had their work cut out for them, but now there was a sense of finality to their struggle. The resupply mission would arrive soon, and with it, the promise of survival. Everyone, listen up, Maya said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. We've made it this far, and we're going to keep going. The resupply mission is coming early. It's not here yet, but it will be soon. Until then, we keep working. We stay focused. We stay alive. The crew stood a little taller. The tension was still there, but it was tempered with a new sense of purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were on the cusp of victory. The relief of hearing that the resupply mission was ahead of schedule was enough to lift the crew's spirits. It was the lifeline they had been desperately hoping for. Yet, despite the surge of hope, there was an unspoken understanding among the crew that they couldn't let their guard down. Mars had a way of throwing new challenges their way, and the situation was still precarious. Maya Sanchez stood in the command room, watching the live feed as the resupply ship's trajectory was plotted on the screen. It was getting closer, but it was still days away from landing. They would have to hold out a bit longer. The supplies it carried could mean the difference between life and death. Anything new on the storm front? Maya asked, looking to Ben, who was at the monitoring station. Ben shook his head, his expression grim. The storms are intensifying. I don't know how long we'll be able to keep the system stable if we lose power again. The storms are unpredictable. One could knock out our communications or even affect the landing. Maya frowned. The pressure was mounting. The resupply ship couldn't afford to be delayed or altered. The thought of it not making it to Mars was an unbearable weight, especially when they were so close to their salvation. We'll need to double-check the systems, Maya said, a note of urgency creeping into her voice. Everything needs to be at peak performance until the supplies arrive. If anything goes wrong with the landing, we need to be ready. Covey, who had been working tirelessly on the atmospheric extractor, looked over at Maya with a sense of determination. We've done everything we can with the equipment we have. But if the storms keep worsening, we might not have the luxury of time. We have to focus on the essentials. The days that followed were a blur of intense preparations. The crew had reached a point where every task, no matter how small, felt crucial. They fortified the habitat against the increasing Martian storms, securing every hatch and reinforcing the power supply systems. The storm had already begun to pick up speed, with violent winds howling against the exterior of the habitat, carrying red dust that blurred the horizon. But inside, the crew worked with a renewed sense of purpose. The water system had stabilized, and even the geothermal pressure, while still unstable, was holding up. There was no time to waste, and with every passing hour, they inched closer to their goal. They couldn't afford to make a mistake now. As the storm raged outside, the sound of the wind pressing against the habitat was deafening. Maya stood in the main corridor, looking through the porthole at the desolate landscape. It felt like an entire world was collapsing in on them. Yet, in the distance, there was something that kept them going. The resupply mission, the possibility of survival. But not even the resupply ship was immune to the dangers of Mars. Mayday! Mayday! The sudden distress call shattered the relative calm inside the habitat. Everyone jumped into action, a sense of dread flooding the room. Maya, Covey, Ben, and the rest of the crew rushed to their stations as the comm system crackled to life. This is Commander Rachel Harris of the resupply mission. We're encountering significant turbulence in the atmosphere. We've lost control of our descent trajectory. We are veering off course, and our systems are failing. We need immediate assistance. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving nothing but a dead static hum. Maya's heart stopped. The resupply mission, the one thing they had been counting on, was in jeopardy. Covey was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. What does this mean, Maya? If the ship crashes? Maya didn't answer right away. She was already running through scenarios in her mind. If the ship went down before it could land safely, all of their preparations, the water systems, the power, would be meaningless. The crew was already surviving on the bare minimum, and the supplies they desperately needed were in that ship. Without it, they wouldn't last much longer. We need to stay calm, Maya said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. We don't know what's happened yet. We need to get in touch with Earth and get updates. Hours passed as the crew tried to establish communication with the resupply mission. The Martian storms were wreaking havoc on the comm systems, making it nearly impossible to get any clear signals. Each attempt was met with crackling interference and a haunting silence. We have to assume the worst, but we can't give up hope, Maya said, rallying the crew as they worked tirelessly, trying to stay focused despite the growing uncertainty. If the resupply mission fails, we will adapt. We've made it this far. We can't give up. Covey was at the atmospheric extractor, monitoring the system's performance. I've adjusted the intake for maximum output, but we're running out of options. There's no guarantee that it will last much longer, especially with the storm intensifying. We may be forced to rely on emergency reserves if the power systems go down. Emergency reserves are running low, Ben reminded them. And if we lose power, there won't be enough to keep the habitat stable. The storm will breach the walls, and we'll be trapped. A cold realization settled in. They were approaching the edge of their resources. The clock was ticking, and every moment felt like it could be their last. Suddenly, the comms crackled again. This time, it was clear. Maya's heart leapt as she rushed to the station, trying to stay composed. "This is Commander Rachel Harris. We've regained partial control of the ship. The descent trajectory is unstable, but we're attempting a manual landing. We've lost communication with the rest of the fleet. We're going down, but we'll make it. We're not giving up." The transmission cut out once again, leaving only static. For a moment, the crew stood in stunned silence. But the words Rachel had spoken rang in Maya's ears. "We're not giving up." That was it. The crew on Mars had no choice but to hold on to that same determination. They couldn't afford to give up either. "Ben," Maya said, her voice firm, "we need to prepare for all possibilities. If they make it down, great. If they don't, we need to be ready to salvage whatever we can from the wreckage. Get the emergency teams in position." Ben nodded, his face grim but resolute. "On it." Maya turned to the rest of the crew. "Covey, double-check the water system and ensure the pressure remains stable. We need to keep everything functioning. If that ship doesn't land in time, we'll need to rely on every ounce of water we've got." The crew dispersed, each member working with an unspoken resolve. The storm raged outside, and their lives hung in the balance. But they were no longer just surviving. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the possibility of a future. As night fell over the Martian landscape, the storm howled louder than ever. The wind seemed to roar through every crack and crevice of the habitat. But within the walls of their small outpost, the crew continued to work, their determination unshaken. They had done everything they could. Now, all they could do was wait and hope. The storm outside was no longer a distant threat. It was an all-encompassing force that pressed against the habitat like a living thing, relentless and unforgiving. Inside, the crew worked in an eerie silence, each person occupied with their tasks but united by the same underlying fear. The resupply mission was in jeopardy, and their chances of survival had never been slimmer. Maya sat at the control station, staring at the flashing indicators. The systems were holding for now, but how long could they last? The pressure on their water systems was rising, and the atmospheric extractor was slowly depleting their energy reserves. They were running out of options. The storm, which had begun as a mere inconvenience, now seemed like the final countdown to their destruction. Suddenly, the comms system came to life with a crackling hiss. "Maya, this is Rachel Harris. I need you to listen carefully. The landing gear, we've lost it. We're coming down hard. I don't know if we'll make it." The transmission faltered, cutting off mid-sentence. Maya's heart clenched in her chest. They were so close, so incredibly close, and yet it felt as though everything was falling apart at once. The weight of the crew's survival rested on that ship, and now, they were hearing the grim reality that it might not make it. The resupply mission was their last hope. "We need to act fast," Maya said, her voice firm as she turned toward Covey and Ben. "If they don't make it, we'll need to salvage whatever supplies we can from the wreckage. We'll prepare the emergency teams." Covey's face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "Understood. We're ready." Ben, his hands shaking with the gravity of the situation, nodded. "I'll get the emergency protocols up and running. It's going to be a nightmare to track the wreckage, but we'll do what we can." Maya exhaled slowly, trying to keep her thoughts from spiraling. "Everyone, stay focused. Whatever happens, we don't give up. We find a way." The team dispersed into action, each of them carrying out their duties with mechanical precision, even as their hearts pounded in their chests. Hours passed in a blur of tension. The storm raged outside, its fury battering against the habitat, and still, there was no word from the resupply ship. The communications had been silent for too long. Maya couldn't help but feel a creeping dread that they were too late. Ben, Covey, any updates? Maya asked, her voice strained. Ben stood by his station, his face grim. Nothing new on the comms. We're getting some weird interference. The storm's making it harder to pinpoint the location. It's like they've gone off the grid entirely. Covey joined Maya at the control station, her eyes darting across the monitors. The atmospheric extractor's down to less than 20% output. If we don't get a resupply soon, we're going to start running low on oxygen and water levels will dip again. We don't have the luxury of time anymore. Maya stared at the flashing warning signs. The resupply mission was supposed to give them the supplies they so desperately needed, but now it was unclear whether it would ever reach them. Then, just as hope was beginning to fade, the comms system came to life again, this time clearer than before. Maya, this is Commander Harris. We've managed to regain partial control. The landing is rough, but we're descending into the northern plains near your location. Prepare for immediate impact. Damaged engines? I can't promise how much is intact. We are coming in hot. The signal cut off abruptly, but Maya could hear the desperation in Harris's voice. There was a chance, just a slim one, that the ship could make it. They're coming down, Covey said, breathless, her eyes wide. But what's left? If they've lost engines, they might crash. Maya's mind raced. If they make it, we can salvage whatever we can. Prepare the team. Get the emergency beacon ready, just in case we need to track the wreckage. The crew scrambled into action. Ben and Covey coordinated the emergency efforts, while Maya ensured the habitat systems were as stable as possible. It felt like they were racing against the clock. The storm's intensity was growing, and it wasn't just the landing they had to worry about. It was everything else that would come after. The unknowns. As they moved quickly to ready the emergency supplies and gear, a distant, thunderous sound reached their ears. It was the unmistakable roar of a ship plummeting toward the surface, the noise echoing through the habitat's walls. Maya turned sharply toward the sound, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. Prepare for impact. Ben shouted from the monitoring station. Seconds later, the entire habitat shook violently, and the crew braced themselves as the ground trembled beneath their feet. It felt as though the entire planet was shaking. The walls of the habitat groaned under the strain, and dust began to trickle in from cracks in the foundation. Maya gripped the counter, her knuckles white. Hold steady, everyone, hold steady. The rumble of the ship's crash landing was deafening, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to go silent. Then came the aftershocks. The storm outside howled even louder, as if in response to the disaster unfolding. When the tremors finally ceased, Maya's voice broke the silence. Status report. Everyone, check in. Ben was the first to respond. We're holding together. Systems are intact, but the storm is still wreaking havoc on the comms. We can't get a visual confirmation yet. But the shockwave from the crash, it's not good. Covey's voice came next. Atmospheric levels are dropping again. If they didn't land near us, we might have to wait for them to send a signal, if they can. Maya's pulse quickened. The resupply mission had crashed, and now it was up to them to find whatever remained of it. The team was already on edge, knowing that the supplies they needed were now scattered somewhere out in the Martian wilderness. We can't wait any longer, Maya said, her tone sharp. Get the search teams ready. We need to find the wreckage. Now. The crew bundled up in their EVA suits, their hearts racing as they stepped into the storm. The visibility was almost zero. Everything was a haze of red dust and swirling wind. Every step was a battle against the elements. But they pressed forward, determined to find the resupply ship before it was too late. Hours passed as they scoured the Martian terrain. They moved with precision, their only goal to locate the wreckage. Their scanners picked up a faint signal from the emergency beacon that the resupply ship had activated during the crash. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they spotted it. The wreckage of the resupply ship lay scattered across the rocky landscape, smoke rising from the twisted metal. The ship's engine had been severely damaged, and the landing was anything but smooth. But the supplies were still there, just barely. Maya's heart raced as she approached the wreckage. They had found it. Against all odds, they had found the ship. Maya, we've got food, water, "And medical supplies," Covey called out, relief flooding her voice. "This is enough to keep us going. But we'll need to make repairs to the habitat as soon as we get back." Maya nodded, her mind still racing. They had done it. They had survived. For now. The crash of the resupply ship was a turning point for the crew. Despite the damage, the wreckage contained enough supplies to keep them alive for a while longer. But it was clear that their situation was still far from secure. They had survived another crisis, but now came the real challenge: maintaining their fragile hold on survival in the face of the ongoing Martian storm and the unknown threats that lay ahead. Maya Sanchez stood in the command center, watching the storm's fury continue to whip around the habitat. She ran her fingers over the control panel in front of her, feeling the steady hum of the systems beneath her fingertips. The power was holding steady for now, but the habitat's infrastructure had taken a heavy toll from the earlier tremors caused by the crash landing. The repairs would be intensive. The rest of the crew had worked tirelessly through the night, retrieving what they could from the wreckage and bringing it back to the habitat. They had enough food and water to last for a while, but their situation was precarious. There was no telling how long the storm would last, and even less certainty about the integrity of their power systems and shelter. "Maya, we've got the water filtration system back online," Covey reported, her face grim but determined. "But we're running out of backup parts. If anything else breaks down, we're in real trouble." Maya nodded, her thoughts already racing through the next steps. "Good work, Covey. We need to ration everything carefully. I don't need to remind you how critical this next phase is. Every decision counts now." Ben, who had been monitoring the storm's progress, spoke up from the corner of the room. "The atmospheric pressure is rising. This storm isn't letting up anytime soon. It might even get worse before it passes." Maya's eyes narrowed. "That's what I was afraid of. We need to make sure all of our systems are at peak performance. If we lose power or heat, the habitat becomes uninhabitable. We can't afford any more mistakes." Despite the sense of urgency, there was a tangible relief among the crew. They had survived the crash, salvaged the necessary supplies, and they had a chance to live through this, at least for the moment. But Maya couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the worst was still ahead. Mars had a way of keeping you on the edge, always threatening to pull the rug out from under you, just when you thought things were improving. As they worked together to assess and repair the habitat, there was a moment of quiet understanding between the crew members. They had faced the impossible. They had stared down certain death and somehow, miraculously, found a way to survive. For Maya, the resupply mission's near disaster had reaffirmed one undeniable truth: no one was coming to save them. If they were going to survive on Mars, they would have to rely on each other. They had no choice. Maya looked around at the exhausted but resilient faces of the crew. Covey was still working on the atmospheric extractor, Ben was carefully analyzing the repair data, and the others were organizing the supplies they had salvaged. Despite everything, they had found a way to carry on. "We've managed to secure enough supplies to last us for a while," Maya said, addressing the group. "But we can't keep living on borrowed time. Our long-term survival depends on rebuilding our infrastructure, expanding our resources, and making sure our systems can withstand future storms." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. They knew she was right. They had made it this far, but there were still no guarantees. Covey, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "We've also got a problem with the geothermal energy. If the storms continue to disrupt our power systems, we'll lose the ability to regulate temperature. It'll get cold in here fast, and that's something we can't afford." Ben added, "The atmospheric extractor is only going to work for so long without proper maintenance. We'll have to take some serious measures soon if we want to ensure we're not relying on emergency reserves again." Maya glanced around the room. Every person in this crew had become irreplaceable. They were more than just survivors. They were a team, bound together by their shared will to make it. "We'll face this head-on," Maya said, her voice unwavering. "We've already been through the worst. We know what we're up against, and we'll keep fighting." That night, as the storm finally started to dissipate and the winds calmed, Maya took a moment to step outside the habitat. The harsh Martian landscape lay before her, bathed in a pale, haunting light. She stood there for a long time, gazing at the horizon, where the dust storm was finally beginning to clear. Mars had always felt hostile, cold, and unyielding. Yet, in that moment, standing on the barren surface of the planet, Maya realized something profound. They had made it. They had endured the unthinkable, and they were still standing. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. The storm may have passed, but their journey was far from over. And as long as they had each other, there was still hope. She knew that survival on Mars was never going to be easy. The planet was unforgiving, and the challenges ahead were enormous. But they had faced death and come out the other side. Whatever happened next, they were no longer just passengers in the story of survival. They were the ones writing it. The storm's departure had brought a temporary respite, but the reality of their situation was setting in. With the resupply mission's supplies now safely stored and their systems more stable, the crew was able to take stock of their situation. But it was clear that this wouldn't be a permanent solution. The clock was ticking. They still needed more sustainable resources, a more reliable power source, and above all, time. Maya led the crew in their first full recon mission outside of the habitat in days. The red landscape was eerily quiet, the vastness of Mars stretching out in every direction. There was still a lot of unknown territory surrounding the habitat. Could they find a more permanent water source? Could they establish new energy production methods? The questions lingered, but for now, the crew needed to focus on what was within their immediate reach. "We'll keep moving forward," Maya said, as they began their trek to explore their surroundings. "We may not have all the answers now, but we're still here, and we have a chance to make a future on Mars." The Martian dawn was unlike anything Maya had ever seen. The first light of the new day spilled across the barren landscape in shades of crimson and gold. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a stillness that seemed almost unnatural. For the first time in weeks, the air felt calm, silent, even. It was as though the planet itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Maya stood at the edge of the habitat's observation deck, gazing out over the vast plains of Mars. The wind had died down, and the once blinding dust storm had receded into the horizon. The dust clouds hung low in the distance, still swirling like distant memories of the danger they had just faced. The crew had made it through. They were still alive. And now, more than ever, the survival of the team depended on their ability to innovate, adapt, and push the limits of what was possible on this unforgiving planet. Maya had never felt so hopeful. She felt a sense of unity, a sense of purpose that had solidified during their darkest hours. They had faced the worst the Martian landscape had to offer, and yet here they were, standing together, stronger than before. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but now it held the promise of something greater than mere survival. It was about thriving in the harshest environment humanity had ever encountered. That morning, after the long night of repairs and reorganization, Maya gathered the team in the main hub of the habitat. They were a mix of weary but determined faces, each one marked by the hardships they had endured. But there was something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. Hope that, maybe, just maybe, they could create something lasting here on Mars. "We've made it through the storm," Maya began, her voice calm but filled with quiet intensity. "We've weathered the worst of it, and we've come out on the other side. But we know this isn't the end. We can't afford to stop now. We're still in the early stages of our mission. Our survival here, on Mars, depends on how far we're willing to push ourselves, on how much we're willing to learn, and on how we work together." Covey, who had been the heart of their technical team throughout the ordeal, nodded. "The geothermal systems are stable now, but we're still not in the clear. We need to get ahead of the next storm. If we don't, we'll end up right back where we started." Ben, ever the pragmatist, added, "The good news is that we've learned a lot. We've repaired the habitat's power systems, restored the atmospheric regulators, and made the most out of what we salvaged. But this place can't be just a temporary shelter. We need to think about how we can make it more sustainable." Maya smiled, her eyes meeting each of theirs with unwavering resolve. "Exactly. We need to be ready for anything. Let's start planning. Our goal isn't just survival, it's building a future here." The team went to work, each person throwing themselves into the task at hand. Covey led the charge on the technical repairs, ensuring that their habitat would be more resilient against future storms. Ben worked on improving the power systems, setting up backup generators, and finding alternative sources of energy. They all knew that their reliance on external resources, like the resupply missions, couldn't be sustained for long. They needed to take matters into their own hands. Meanwhile, Maya focused on strategy. She spent hours poring over the maps of Mars, planning expeditions to find long-term resources, water, food, and energy. She knew that their best chance for survival and growth lay beyond the habitat, on the surface of Mars itself. "We've already made the most of what's inside the habitat," Maya said to the team one evening. "Now, we need to explore what's outside. Our next mission is to establish a sustainable source of water. Without it, we're done." They began planning their next excursion to explore the surrounding Martian terrain, to identify water-rich areas, and scout for potential sites for future habitats or mining operations. It was a daunting task, but they had the tools, the will, and the skills to make it happen. Days turned into weeks, and the crew's resilience began to shine through. They explored the rugged Martian landscape, discovering underground caves that might hold water in frozen form. They mapped out potential sites for solar and wind energy systems. They even started growing small plants in the habitat's greenhouse, experimenting with ways to produce food sustainably. Each success, no matter how small, was a triumph. But they knew there was still so much left to do. Mars was a planet of extremes, extreme temperatures, extreme dust storms, and extreme isolation. But it was also a planet that offered new beginnings, if they were willing to work for them. One afternoon, as Maya and Covey sat together reviewing their plans for the next phase of exploration, Covey looked up from her tablet. "Maya, do you ever wonder if we'll actually succeed in the long run? I mean, we're on Mars, for crying out loud. It's not exactly known for being welcoming." Maya chuckled softly. "I do wonder sometimes. But then again, we've come this far, right? We're still here. We've already beaten the odds just by surviving. Why not push further? Why not make something out of this, out of the impossible?" Covey's eyes lit up. "You're right. If we can survive here, we can do anything." That evening, as the Martian sky faded into a deep orange red, Maya stood on the observation deck once more, watching the first stars of the night twinkle in the vast, empty expanse. The crew had just returned from their latest expedition, with promising results. They had found signs of underground water, and their solar energy systems were functioning better than expected. The storm was over, the dust had settled, and for the first time, Maya felt like the future was within reach. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building a life here, on Mars. They had overcome the worst of it, and now, they were in control of their destiny. "We're not just surviving," Maya said softly to herself. "We're thriving." The future was uncertain, and there would still be many challenges to face. But Maya knew that the team was stronger than ever. They had come to Mars to explore, to push the boundaries of human achievement. And now, they were creating something no one had ever imagined. A future for humanity on the Red Planet. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?